Can you mute your microphone, Aaron? Thank you. Welcome everyone to another exciting edition of the Magic Sandwich Show, where it's a huge pleasure to be joined by Hogtie Champ and Concordance. Welcome, gentlemen. How are you?
Quite good. Holiday weekend here, so.
Yeah, doing very well. It's very hot here. It's been a hot week already.
Well, you mentioned heat. This is, I want people to notice, look, I am actually in a t-shirt. This is probably one of only 2 weekends that I have the opportunity to do this show in a t-shirt. It has been remarkably hot here for the last 2 days, which is absolutely fantastic. It also means, unfortunately, though, that my computer is suffering because it can't deal with hot weather. So its fan is going around like the clappers. So if you hear any background noise, it's probably my poor computer struggling under the heat. I also want to show, I'm actually drinking a cold tinny, I think, for the American viewers, with a Concordance. Help me out again. What's this called? A cozy or something? You might have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, I can't think of it anyway. Yeah. A koosh. A beer goosh.
All right. Anyway, this is one that Aaron bought me from Arizona. So thank you, Aaron, for that. It's being put to good use. No specific topics lined up. We've got a couple of question and answers that we'll be addressing in due course, but I know Concordance wants to kick off with something first. But just to remind you, if you would like to join the show to discuss pretty much any issue related to science or religion, send a Skype contact request to Magic Sandwich Show, including in that, please, the gist of the topic or question that you'd like to raise. If you don't include it, I'll simply ignore it, I'm afraid. If you have sent one before and been accepted, you'll probably have to resend it because I do clear out the list of contacts after each show. The alternative way you can do it, I don't know where you're watching it from, because you can watch it from Google Hangouts, you can watch it on YouTube, you can watch it on, I think also on the web page now, but wherever you're watching it, you should be able to see somewhere, I think the top right corner, maybe the top left corner, a Q&A symbol. So if you'd like to submit a question through that, just click on that. It's self-explanatory. We've already got a few questions coming, so we will be addressing those shortly. But I know Concordance, who can only stay with us for, unfortunately, a short time today, has an issue that he would like to raise. So we're going to kick off with that. Concordance.
So for all of you outside the U.S., you may not have followed the controversy around the town of Greece versus Galloway. It's a recent Supreme Court decision about a week and a half ago. The issue was whether or not a prayer at the beginning of a session for a city council meeting, town board meeting in this case, violated the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. And by a narrow margin, the Supreme Court ruled that town board meetings, city council meetings, town council type things, they can start with an official prayer. So long as, and this was the proviso that went into it, it doesn't proselytize and it doesn't denigrate anyone else's religion. And the basis for their decision was that the framers of the Constitution, one of the very first things they did was to establish a chaplain's office for Congress, for the Senate, for the House, and that they regularly offered prayers prior to sessions. And of course, the U.S. Congress has an official prayer. They also ruled that essentially being forced to attend a session that began with a prayer did not discriminate in any way, didn't make anyone feel uncomfortable, and didn't impede their ability to speak. Now, I would contend that they don't gain anything either. There's nothing, about a government function that would require a prayer. And I would also argue that the only way to truly avoid some sort of a stifling effect is simply not to have it. If you need to pray, you can go outside, or you can meet 30 minutes before the session, or 10 minutes before the session, or whatever. You can all go hold hands around the flagpole and pray to our Lord Beelzebul. But I don't think that there is a place in proceedings of a government nature that are supported by my tax dollars that we're basically paying our representatives to express their personal religious feelings. Those are personal feelings. They should be kept in the personal realm. In the public realm, we should stay focused on public related issues, things that apply to everyone, and not just to people who are obviously sort of a tacit endorsement of turning the town council into a prayer meeting. I don't think it's necessary. I think it was a very bad decision. I think there are a number of people who agree with me. On the other hand, I have to admit, it seems like a pretty minor issue to deal with. City council meetings are not really, I don't know, major element in our democracies. But it's the principle of the thing that is a little bit.
I suppose the argument would be made by some that it is it's a narrow end of the wedge, and if they succeed in this regard, then they're going to be optimistic and succeed in greater issues. I suppose that I'm trying to play devil's advocate as best I can here.
Right.
I'm
you know, but DPR, you mentioned something before we started the call up that is probably very true, and that is there are any number of ways to inject a personal expression of religious belief. For example, you can do a point of order during the proceedings and say, I just want to, go on record as saying that I love my Lord Jesus Christ, or all hail Beelzebul. Whatever they want to say, they're welcome to put that on their record and make it a personal statement as well. And the U.S. presidents are infamous, I guess, outside of the U.S. for dragging their religion into political speeches. It's just what we've done, and we've done it for a very long time. I think that stands alone or separate from this issue, which is a matter of procedure. That is, in order to participate in this, you must all sit through a prayer. That's different than a personal expression, because now it's become a requirement, right? It's become something that you must participate in. And I think the fact that the Supreme Court didn't see that is a matter of bias. The justices who ruled against the motion, the ones who were said it was okay to pray, were the most conservative, and the most liberal voted against. It was a 5-4 decision. I don't know, maybe it will change later. But again, it's not a huge issue. It's just a matter of principle.
Just before I come to Hogtie, one of the people in the Q&A has said that your camera is zooming in and out. I don't know what setting you have it on, but it's actually quite distracting. So if you could turn that off, that would be great.
It's Michael Bay. Michael Bay camera work.
It lends a certain energy to the broadcast.
it does that. Hogtie, your views.
Again, so nicely summed up by Concordance. It certainly is a small issue, and I will say one in which the discussion is somewhat contaminated by Christians who will say, like when this concern is raised, as I think nicely packaged by Concordance, when the concern is raised that we're trying to make some distinctions here in public policy, and some people will then characterize it. I'm thinking like Fox News will characterize it. Oh, well, these atheists are offended by Christian prayer. The atheists are offended by the Bible. The atheists are offended by the Ten Commandments. And it's not an issue of offense. And I mean, I always want to say, whenever they bring up this issue about how atheists are offended by this or that, just challenge them. Find me an example of an atheist when putting forward an argument why we should not entrench prayer in these civil processes. Find me a video clip, someone on the news who said, but I'm offended by that. Because they're not. That's not what it comes down to. I think that the people who try to draw these distinctions do so on reasoned grounds, like what Concordance just presented. And I grant I kind of roll my eyes a little bit too, because it's really a small issue. So what if we have a prayer? It's not that big of a deal. But the application of the law and the formation of public policy is really full of a lot of these small distinctions, apparently trivial distinctions, but they're there for a reason, and they force us to contemplate what kind of a society are we envisioning. And like as Concordance said, if somebody wants to make expression of their personal beliefs about what their favorite football team is or what their favorite holy book is, there should at all times be, all appropriate times be free to do that. But we need to draw a line somewhere, and I think quite reasonably that line is drawn at when you entrench it in the public process. When you say, to participate in this meeting, we're going to face our chairs in this direction, and we're going to say this prayer. That's the point when we got to say, well, now this is becoming part of the process and not individual expression, but rather a compelled civil community expression, and that's where the boundary is.
Let's expand on that a little bit, if I can, Hogtie. You referenced turning the chairs a certain direction. That was the only analogy I thought to maybe convey to people who don't see the problem here, is imagining that they live in a Muslim-dominated country, where in order to attend the city council, you must, sit through, the muezzin calls for prayer and everyone bows. You don't have to bow. You don't have to touch your forehead to the ground. You don't have to do any of those things. But being surrounded by these people, if you've come to have your grievances aired, if you've come to get redress for something, or you feel disadvantaged in some way or stuck out in some way, it could be just another way that you feel excluded, right? You feel ostracized. You feel like you're not part of the culture and society in which you are an active participant. Again, I feel like if I pay my taxes, I have a right to have my views represented. Not necessarily forced on everyone, but I think that the rules should be set up so that they are fair. And the only way, I think, to make things fair is to simply remove it out. No reference whatsoever to religion, unless it is part of a personal expression. But nothing that the government does should favor or harm any particular religious view or lack of religious view.
It's interesting, Concordance. I was only familiar with this judgment in the last 15 minutes when you mentioned it just before we went live. And one of the things that I scribbled down was, what about Muslims? Because from your description of the judgment is based on the idea that America was founded on Christian values. But it seems to me that the judgment is highly discriminatory against people of other faiths. And also, it does beg the question, I guess, to a degree, which version of Christianity are they relying on? Because obviously there are quite diverse views and opinions about Christian beliefs and denominations. It seems I'd love to read the judgment. It seems very odd to me.
Yeah, I think that's the general view of most experts. Of course, Fox News has come down very strongly in favor of this. And again, they have precedent as well. If you're looking at the founders and the framers, they were very religious people. And prayer was to them a very important part. Benjamin Franklin wrote the official prayer, and Benjamin Franklin's not exactly a standard Lutheran, Baptist, Methodist type of guy, but he did write a prayer, and it very selectly talks about God and so on. The issue of not representing minority religious views has opened the door, and maybe this is a way to capitalize on a bad decision because they can't show discrimination. That's opened the door for Pastafarians to insist that their prayers are given, and they can come up with whatever silly chant they want to. Maybe that's not a good strategy, but I think in Oklahoma or Oregon or somewhere there was actually a Satanist group that insisted that their satanic prayer be offered before the city council meeting. And Wiccans and so on have all been invited to do whatever rituals they feel necessary. So who knows, it may end up creating more bad sentiment amongst religious people than it really benefits any kind of religious. I mean, come on. What more proselytization does the Christian religion need in the United States? Okay? They've already won. Be graceful in victory, okay?
Well, I don't think they consider it proselytizing. I think they consider it as a way of kind of unifying those that are present. And of course, when they say that, it would not be very inclusive. While there might be a Muslim person there, well, we're not going to force that Muslim person to say our prayer, or there might be an atheist,
right,
whatever. The thing that they do, again, sort of this particular decision, I think there's a view that it's that when they look at these religious practices as part of the civil processes, they'll say, well, it's benign. Like, what harm is there in having a Bible in the on the witness stand, or I believe in other countries is it the dock or wherever, where you there's a Bible there and you have the option of swearing your oath upon that Bible, or what's the harm in having a little Christian prayer? These things are very benign. Whereas, wait a minute, a satanic prayer? I mean, that doesn't, off the top of my head, it doesn't sound like that's going to be a good thing. And then, of course, some people would argue, this is not me saying this, of course, but some people would say that well, we can't have like Muslim prayers and stuff because those people are terrorists. I mean, this is where those, like the Nutter Christians will go with this, is to say, well, what's the harm in our little prayer, whereas these other things, the Wiccans and the Pastafarians and these things, it's just all an insult, and what's wrong with our little thing? And what they don't seem to realize they're doing is that whenever they want someone in the public sector, whether it's a city council or judges when they bring these matters to the courts, when they tell them, well, look, our particular little ritual is actually fairly benign and this other one is harmful, or ours is based on truth and theirs isn't, they're asking the public officials to rule on the reasonableness of the claims. And they just don't seem to realize that that's where the danger lies. That's why this is a minefield, is that as soon as you start allowing public officials to make assessments about the truth or the consequences or any of these other things related to veracity of a religious claim, well, then now you have public officials ruling on the truth of religious claims. Like to me, it's obvious why you should not ever allow that.
Brilliantly put. That's so eloquent.
Well, we're joined by our first caller. I hope we're joined by our first caller who wants to touch upon this issue. Are you with us? Is it Simon?
Yes, I'm with you. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly. How are you?
I'm okay. Hopefully there's no buzzing this time. I think I've worked out why that happened last time I called in.
Okay. No, you sound fine to us. What have you got for us?
To be honest, I think the point I was going to raise has already been covered by people, but I thought I'd add my perspective. So I am an atheist, but I was born and raised in a Jewish family within Great Britain. And I sort of wanted to say that as somebody who was raised in a minority religion, it is actually somewhat off-putting when you have to sit there through other people's prayers, because it's a constant reminder that you don't quite fit. And no matter how nice they are about it, of, oh, you don't have to join in, oh, it's okay, you sit there and everyone can see that you're not joining in, and everyone can see that you don't quite fit, and invariably people will come up and ask you, so why didn't you pray, or why weren't you joining in with this? And you then either have to lie or explain to them, well, actually I happen to be an atheist, or I happen to be a Jew and I'm not very comfortable. So I thought of just sort of, it's not just atheists, as I think people have already been saying, it's actually other minority religions as well. And on another personal note, I'm a British person. In Great Britain, we've had a lot of people saying, oh, well, Great Britain's a Christian country. We get that sometimes. Well, my family's been in this country for hundreds of years and always been Jewish, but we've still participated in this country. So how am I supposed to feel? How am I supposed to respond to this apparently Christian country where my relatives have paid taxes, gotten involved? Do we not quite fit? Do we not quite... And it is exclusionary.
Well, you're lesser people. You pay taxes, but you're not represented, right? Which is, Americans fought a little bit of a war about the whole taxation without representation, right? The whole idea is that, you know, your vote comes with your taxes, and you should feel comfortable. It should be your government because you're helping to pay for it. Yeah. What about the Hindus and the Buddhists and so forth being asked to attend a Christian ceremony, essentially, in order to have their voices heard?
No, absolutely, and it's for those people that are coming from those things. I don't think there's such a thing in America, but within Britain, it was only, I say relatively recently, it used to be that Catholics, Jews, were not allowed to sit in the House of Commons, and then obviously the law eventually got changed. But for those of us that have the history within the countries, we know that that used to be the case. And at what point, very bizarre laws, things like certain people couldn't enter certain parishes, so it was a religious place, so certain religious people couldn't enter. Well, when you start holding your political meetings in those places, even if they're allowed to talk, they're not allowed to enter the building. And it's, yeah, no, it's, people have already raised it, but it is exclusionary for, not only for atheists, but for those people that don't quite fit whatever the religious norm is. And it is only a very small step away. Once you have an official prayer, it's only a small step away from saying, well, we have an official prayer, so this country has an official religion. But don't worry, we're not going to say you can't be of another religion. We're just going to say that our country has an official religion, and then everybody who doesn't quite conform to that, you are purposely slightly excluded from the rest of society, from the rest of the system, whether you choose to be or not.
Yeah,
We're joined
I'm
by
going to...
Nathaniel, who wants to add to your observations. Nathaniel, are you with us?
Yeah, hi. Hi, guys. Been a while. I wanted to second what Simon said. I also grew up in England for 4 years when I was very young. And I'm an atheist, as you may know, but I was raised Jewish. And I also grew up in Belgium. And I completely agree with what he's saying about what it feels like to be outside of the group while everybody's praying and performing religious rituals. First of all, my family was never religious; they were secular, but we're Jewish secular. So yeah, there's it really does set you apart, especially when you're a young kid, especially around Christmas time. When school activities, etc., all revolving around Christmas, etc., and this was 1970s Britain. It's a little different today, perhaps, but yeah, it really does. It does kind of ostracize you in a sense because you are an extreme minority in the group, sometimes a minority of one. So
I have to say that I've not really thought about this before, but I do recall I was brought up in the first few years of education at a private school, which was very much a Christian school, and there were Jewish people there, and I do recall them not participating in certain events, and it's a very vague memory, so please don't ask me to be too specific about it. I remember thinking at the time that they were different, but I don't remember thinking that they were worse or in some way less superior. But yeah, I certainly I just thought they were different.
If I could jump in with two little points,
Sure.
From somebody who's from that perspective, when I was going to school, I would have rather not spoken about it to people. I'd rather kept it to myself and had it a private matter. It wasn't relevant to my education. I actually went to a Church of England school for my primary school, and they had regular prayers. Now, for the first few years of going, my mum just told us, look, just join in the prayers, it makes no difference. If there's a God, he doesn't mind, just do it. But over time, we got more and more uncomfortable, so we stopped joining in. The other children would notice, and perfectly innocently at first would start asking questions about why aren't you joining in and what's going on. And for somebody who's only 7 or 8, who doesn't really understand, you're answering difficult questions and not quite, you can't answer the questions properly. And, people would ask, well, do you not believe Jesus existed? Or maybe he did, I don't know. And you're forced into that outsider group, and I say without your choice, it's just another thing that kids can use to bully other kids or to make people feel outside and different. To disagree ever so slightly with something that the other gentleman said, when he said that...
I absolutely agree, and I completely... I was there. I experienced it too. So yeah, I am completely in agreement with you.
To slightly disagree with something that you said, Nathaniel, you talked about the idea that you were raised a secular Jew. I have relatives, and my grandfather was a religious Jew. And for years and years, up until the point where he passed away, he always used to complain. We had Great Britain have a census, and in the census it asked you religion. And every year, or every time he got it, he always used to write a letter saying that he couldn't put the correct answer on the piece of paper. So he lied on it, and he just said, oh, I'm Christian. And eventually they allowed you to put atheist, and he started ticking that, but he continued to complain. And then towards the end, they at long last put no answer on there. My grandfather still complained because he felt that there should be an answer on there saying it's none of the government's damned business, and that was a religious man. And
Yeah.
he always wrote to his MP, he wrote to the local councillor saying, this census is wrong, there should be an answer for people like me, it's not your business. You shouldn't even ask me the question. And he always used to complain about it. And so even religious Jews, you don't have to be a secular Jew, as it were, you still be quite religious and say, this isn't the government's place to even ask the question. So I happen to have
I agree. But yeah, I was raised secular. I mean, my parents were never religious. They observed the holidays like secular cultural Jews basically. But then they would go to synagogue, etc. But not really. I mean, there was no belief in it. It was just a tradition, and they never. I remember actually in synagogue in Sunday school we were taught the story of the Ark, etc. And we were never told it was real. In fact, I remember sometimes them saying, "Yeah, well, this is a story. This is part of our mythology, a part of our legends, etc." Which I thought was pretty cool. But yeah, I was always secular. But you still feel outside of the group because you don't believe in Jesus. You don't pray to Jesus during Christmas. And I went to a very formal British school when I was young. It was Hill House in England, and we had the uniforms and everything. We had chapel prayers, and you do sit outside the group. I think there were maybe 3 of us or 2 of us in the whole school at the time. So yeah, it does set you apart.
When you say you sit outside, you were literally physically separate from the group.
Well, it was kind of a. I mean, I was very, very young at the time, and a lot of my experiences also come from being young in Belgium. So from like 2 years, 3.5 years, 4 years old to almost 10 years old, but. Yeah, you either sit outside of the group because you're not bowing your head, etc. So you sit in the back, or you just kind of pretend, but you don't sing along, you don't really care, and you don't believe. So you are in effect an atheist, even if you are a religious Jew. You're an atheist according to them because you're not taking part. So and they know you're not taking part. They know you're not Christian, etc., because somehow they find out, or you tell them, or whatever, or you treat it a little bit differently. So yeah, you're set apart. I mean, I wasn't really bullied or anything, but you do feel kind of ostracized in that respect, especially, as I said, especially around Christmas time.
I know Hogtie wants to jump in, but just very briefly, I'd like to ask both the callers. Although I remember this from childhood, the sort of like the fact that there were people who were different from the mainstream, I don't recall any sort of hostility, discrimination, or whatever. And I just wonder, are you saying? Because, and I think part of this is because in this country, religion is just such a weak background noise; it's of no consequence. Would you disagree with that? Do you think that you were in some way, apart from the obvious discrimination that you've referred to, were you subject to detrimental treatment as a result?
Well, I already said no. Well, I'll let Simon answer first.
I did suffer a little bit, yes. I was bullied by some of the kids for other reasons as well, but that was just another stick to use. I was almost told off by a teacher at the church school because we were told to all bow our heads, and everybody else bowed their heads, and I wasn't very comfortable. So the teacher pointed at me, started coming towards me, and then another teacher intervened to say, no, that's a Jewish kid, he's not going to do it. They offered allowing me to stand outside as though that was going to help, and obviously that wasn't. It was just going to make me look more outside. The worst of it, and the point where we eventually decided to completely disengage, they brought in one of the priests from the church that was linked to us, and it wasn't me, but it was my older brother. He called him a Christ killer, which is probably the worst thing that we had happen. And my parents put in a formal complaint. The priest claimed it didn't happen. My older brother swore blindly that it did, and we decided to go to a different school after that. So relatively low level, but yes, I did suffer some.
Yes.
Yeah, I
Hogtie.
never had anything like that. But
Hogtie.
I was just going to briefly take us back to the issue about the municipal governments and prayer and that sort of thing, and I want to make clear that I think there's an interesting discussion about when you live in a community that has sort of a particular religious or cultural grain, but you're sort of in the out group, you're not amongst them. I do think that's interesting, and what I'm going to say, I don't mean to sound unsympathetic, but I do want to make clear that it's really not the municipal government's job to sort of make sure that the occasional Jewish person or the occasional Muslim that lives in a Christian community feels comfortable. In fact, I think this is a valuable thing for communities and especially schools. With kids that they learn that we're different and there needs to be an environment of inclusiveness. Like I remember one girl I went to school with, and she was quite dark-skinned and had very long, straight, dark hair and wouldn't eat Oreo cookies because at the time Oreo cookies had beef tallow in them. I didn't understand that. She was different, right? So I think that we all have to culture our kids into sort of accepting that not everybody is of the same cultural or religious grain as you are. But it's just not at all a concern for municipal governments. Like it's unfortunate that even though you're in a community, like you guys are saying, and DPR says that, oh, well, we didn't really feel less like that there's somehow that the Jewish people or the Muslims or whatever were, they were different, but we didn't think that they were somehow less. Whereas you guys are speaking to a very real experience that you do just because you feel different and on the outside. And I'm sympathetic to that, and I think that the only role when it comes to these, municipal governments aren't there to make other people feel more included. The thing that blows my mind though is that why are they taking that step in the town of Greece to actually do things to increase that feeling of exclusion? Their job is to deal with subdivision applications and somebody who wants a building permit
Potholes.
to put a double-wide garage. They're not there to help people feel more included, and they're certainly not there to take steps to sort of entrench a particular culture and to increase the feelings of outgroup amongst members of outgroups.
Unless Jesus wants to pick up a shovel and start moving asphalt. I mean, that would be kind of helpful.
Well, I just wanted to say, I mean, when I'm talking about my experience, I'm talking as a kid, it's, today I'm an atheist, so there, out in America, I'm in the minority no matter what, but as an atheist, I'm particularly in a minority. I'm not in America, I'm in Israel, but, when I was in America, and that's a little different, but we're talking about kids, and that's, it's not to say anything about, what the municipal government should do, etc., but I'm just saying that the experience is completely different. I think adults can handle it completely differently than children can. Although I do want to add one more thing. I do have fond memories from that time of Christmas, etc., with friends who would invite me for Christmas and Christmas crackers, etc., and all the rest. So it wasn't like I wasn't, completely ostracized from, I had no friends, etc. No, it wasn't like that. It's just that in school, during certain events, in an official capacity, you do feel slightly outside of the group, or sometimes more than slightly. And as a child, it's not as easy to deal with sometimes as an adult. That's all.
If I can sort of jump back in, I wish to point out that various bad experiences, I don't think the Judaism made those happen. I think they would have happened anyway. It was just another factor to it. The reason that it's somewhat linked is you're forcing an issue that person may not want to talk about. That person may not want to discuss at a local government meeting their religious views and opinions. They may just want to turn up and talk about, the holes in the roads. They don't want to have to explain to people, no, I'm not joining in because I'm a Muslim, a Jew, an atheist. They just don't think it's relevant. And you're subtly forcing that issue to come up, even if that's not the intention. That's what's going to happen. I did have another question I wanted to raise, particularly with concordance if that's possible. I know it needs to go relatively soon.
Yes, certainly. Before you do, I just want to deal with one of the questions that has been posed, because before we perhaps move on to a different topic. The commenter is Heavy Hauler, who says allowing a prayer would set a precedence. It's a foot in the door, like back when creationists were trying to get intelligent design to be taught as another view of the origins of life. I think they're still trying, but yes, that's my concern about this judgment. Did anyone want to comment on that before we move on to the next point?
Could I take the question? I really do have to run in two and a half minutes. What was the question?
You have 2.5 minutes. You have to. It should be up on your screen if you go to the Q&A. Allowing a prayer would set. I'm
Simon. Simon had a question.
Simon's question.
Or Nathaniel.
Yeah, sorry. Yes.
I did have a very quick question. I think you've discussed it slightly before. Recently, World Health Organization's told us antibiotics are going to stop working and we're all in trouble. How much trouble are we in, and is there an answer, or is there a way that we can help to sort the problem out?
You're talking about the failure of antibiotics and multi-drug resistant bacteria?
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
It is a matter of money. Like a lot of things, the changing demand for a product will change the amount of risk that companies are willing to take. Right now, antibiotics are not a profitable venture. Okay, what we will probably have to suffer through is a point at which we desperately need antibiotics, newly arrived antibiotics, and there's just nothing feeding the pipeline for 4, 5, 6, 8, maybe 10 years before we could respond to an urgent issue. You know, if it's multi-drug resistant something or another that would wipe out 1 out of every 6 or 1 out of every 8 people in the world, that would be a hell of a thing. But humanity would go on. It would just, the markets would collapse and the, healthcare system would just be in ruins. I think that what has to happen is the government has to show a little foresight and start investing money in antibiotic pipelines now. The way drugs are created, just to give you the very big picture, is we take these gigantic libraries of compounds, hundreds of millions of little variations on natural substances and synthetic backbones. Right? You run these things through, you culture them out, you give them a good systematic tests. But you're talking about hundreds of millions of tests have to be run in order to find those substances that are likely to cause bacterial inhibition or lysis or whatever it may be. So the amount of money that you have determines the number of robots and scientists and technicians that are working on that problem. And right now, penis pills are the biggest moneymaker in the world, because the people with money are not the people who are dying of bacterial illness. They're not the people who have tuberculosis. They're pardon me, but they're the rich white people, the rich middle-aged white people who have the highest incomes. It's the same reason why, with the right amount of resource, we could probably knock out malaria, not tomorrow, but within 5 years. But who's going to pay for it? The kind of people who have malaria are not the kind of people who can afford to pay $100 a day for a pill. The same thing for HIV. There's a lot of research into it, but there's probably almost as much research into using HIV to treat rich white people diseases like heart disease and cancer as there is to the actual effort to create an AIDS vaccine, which is what was really needed to save 10, 15 million people who are dying every year. So that's really the issue. You can panic about it if you want to, but it's kind of like if we extrapolate it, we would have a horrible, horrible time for a number of years. Who knows the economic and social damage that would come from people stacked up in the streets like cordwood. But in the end, we would come up with additional antibiotics. Really just a matter of economics. That's my opinion, by the way.
He doesn't speak for everyone, but I have to say I agree with everything he says. Concordance, I know that you have to rush, so thank you very much for your time, and a thumbs up, please, for Concordance. Simon, was there anything else? Or Nathaniel, was there anything else? I've got a couple of callers lined up.
No, that's it. I'll fall on my sword for you. Thanks very much for having me again.
Thank you for joining us, Simon.
No, I have nothing else. I'm happy to leave if you want to bring other people in. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Before I do, there are a couple of questions that have been sent to us that I want to address. So they've been sent through the Q&A. If you're just joining us, if you want to ask a question of now only me and Hogtie Champ. I feel desperately lonely and insecure now. It's a good job you're here, Hogtie. But if you want to ask either of us a question, preferably relating to science or religion, science will be answered by Hogtie in the main. But there are a couple of questions. I don't know whether you can actually, whether you've got them up on your screen.
Yes, I've been going through the Q&A and intermittently checking the all comments page on our video here. I think a moment ago you'd drawn our attention to the foot in the door.
Yeah, we've done that one.
Okay.
Let's move on. I wanted to go to one of the first ones that came in, and they do seem to come in. Oh, that's because they get voted up or down. I want to take this one, if I may, and it comes from Swig's Sky Tower. As I understand the scientific method, the main goal is to make predictive models of reality. I do agree we should take pride in models that work, but how to impress the model's strength without claiming omniscience on the topic? That's not actually the one I wanted to pick, but it was a similar one. Let me see if I can actually find it, because where's it gone? Ah, yes. We'll take this one. It's on a similar sort of topic. Or is it? Have I pressed the wrong one? No, I've pressed the wrong one again. This one.
They're all interesting as they go by, that's for sure.
My understanding is that the calculations and stuff that scientists use to figure so much of what happened right after the Big Bang breaks down at what they think is the actual instant it happened. I know I'm saying this badly, but maybe makes sense. That's from Abby Haller. Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying, that science has built up certain models that predict, to a large degree, what we perceive as reality, but they break down at the initial stages of the creation of the universe. I assume you're asking, or I'm implying that you're asking, does that make the models a bad thing, or does it mean they're incomplete? I don't know. How do you interpret that, Hogtie?
I'm even kind of integrating the two questions. The first that you focused there that is about science. The progress of science often hinging on making better and better models, and when we say a model is better, we don't necessarily mean it's closer to the truth, although it generally turns out to be the case. But when we say a model is better, it's because it makes it's more reliable in its predictions, and more reliable in its postdictions as well, something that's able to explain the history of observation so far. And there is an interesting passing familiarity, this type of weird relationship between when we say that, well, we have a good model for this thing. Science has, somebody has come up with this model and we've tested it and it's a really, really good model. Well, then is it really true? Well, the truth is sort of secondary to that. I mean, generally the truth comes along in a sidecar. With a good predictive model. The example that I used a couple of times on the show here and had people rub their temples was when I've said that I don't believe in gravity, and by that I mean obviously, gravity is an explanation of a phenomenon, but when you ask people what gravity is, they'll say, well, matter is attracted to each other. You hold up a bowling ball and it'll be attracted to the earth, and the two of them will collide and leave a dent in your lawn. And I say, I don't really see any indication that things are actually attracted to other things. That there's a completely different and very elaborate model that explains why things tend to crash into each other. But it doesn't matter, because either way you've still got a model that says, well, this thing's going to crash into that thing. I'm going to lose my point here. The thing about the Big Bang and sort of the usefulness of it as a model, I do want to say something about the singularity, because this is something I see being discussed a lot on YouTube these days, is that you know, the rapid expansion of the universe is an effective model for explaining why we see cosmic background radiation today, why we see redshift in galaxies moving away. And things used to be closer together, and that helps explain things like the formation of galaxies, formation of stars, and whatnot. But when you take the mathematical models that they have for these things, there is a point at the very beginning of it where the formulas themselves don't make sense. And the physicists and mathematicians refer to that as a singularity. And it seems to me that as people discuss it, they've come up with this idea that the singularity is a thing. It's a little speck of something at the beginning of time and at the beginning of space. And it's the singularity that went poof and blew up. And it's a little frustrating because a singularity is strictly a hole in a mathematical model. So, for example, if you were, you know, selling shoes and you had a model for how many shoes you could sell as a function of the price of the shoes, and that model was, you know, let's say Y is the number of shoes you could sell, and X is the price on the shoes, and Y equals 1 divided by X. That basically, the more expensive you make your shoes, the fewer and fewer of those shoes you're going to sell. Well, what happens if you were to charge $0 for your shoes? Well, Y equals 1 over X. 1 over 0 is undefined, or it approaches infinity. Well, it means you're going to sell infinite shoes? Well, obviously that's not true. And what happens if you didn't want to sell any shoes at all? Well, you'd have to charge an infinite price. Well, that doesn't make sense. Now, anybody who knows anything about this sort of very easy algebra knows those things to be asymptotes, right? So when people ask questions like, well, what is the singularity made of? You may as well ask, well, what is an asymptote made of? Right? These are, so the fact that the models of the early universe, that is, mathematical models of the early universe, give us some good guidance as to what really happened up to a point. And then there gets to be a point where there is a mathematical singularity, that is, the formulas just don't make sense anymore. There's infinite density, infinite gravity. What that means is that while it's an effective model, there is something there that's probably not true. And this is a great, sort of a good question for guys like Matt Hunt, who study these kind of issues. I hope somewhere in my lengthy meandering answer there was some illumination in there, but...
Well, I think a great deal, and I suppose what frustrates me is, and I must make this clear before I begin, I'm really not a scientist at all. I've got a very, very limited understanding of science, but I've got I suppose, some sort of nous about what makes sense and what doesn't. And the explanations that we have and the models that we have do seem to me to make sense. And what frustrates me enormously is when there are holes in the scientific models where the scientists freely admit, we don't know. We don't know how this happens. We don't know what's at the center of a black hole. We don't know what happened before 0.000 many zeros after the initial expansion. And people who are utterly ignorant of science, namely, I'm referring obviously to the religious, grasp this as sort of like some argument in support of their particular god. That really frustrates me. I don't understand how they think that it's a meaningful argument. It isn't. The fact that something is unknown means it is unknown. It doesn't mean that you have the opportunity to slip in, oh, well, then God did it. Oh, and not any God, my God.
Yeah, my God,
the
yeah.
specific God I believe in.
Well, Ken Ham is still going to, I swear the guy's going to throw a shoulder out, patting himself on the back, with this amazing moment he had during his debate with Bill Nye, where when Bill Nye was saying, when asked, you know, how did the universe begin, and he says, well, we don't know. No one knows. Actually, the question was stupider than that. The question was, where did all the atoms come from, or where did, all the molecules come from, that, you know, in the Big Bang, and just reveals, and he was very classy of Bill Nye to not point out how that question reveals such a fundamental misunderstanding of the most basic of science about cosmology. You know, where did the atoms come from? But anyway, he took it to mean, you know, where did the stuff, the things, the space, the time, where did, you know, energy, where does this stuff come from? And he says, I think he rather than being picky about the poor understanding in the question, really got to what the person was intending to ask, and that is, how did it start? You know, and he turned it into a really good direction. He said, well, we don't know. No one knows. That's fine. And then Ken Ham has his oh, well, I have this book. And I think that as much as he's like so impressed with himself that he came up with this great line, it's facepalm worthy, because when somebody expresses their frustration and enthusiasm for not knowing what you know, like, well, what happened before that first second, the first, you know, Planck instant, for somebody else to say, oh, well, I have a book that explains that. Oh, show me the book. Oh, in the beginning. And then literally that's your scientific model.
Let's touch upon this. And I know we've got a couple of callers waiting, and please give us a little patience if you wouldn't mind, because this is something that, as I say, deeply frustrates me. And yes, I remember that specific moment in that debate, and I actually for a moment thought that Ken Ham was joking, and then I realised he wasn't. He was being serious. Yeah, I've got a book that tells me, and I it's something that I deeply struggle with, because this is something that one of our callers is going to raise. What is the goal of this show? And in fact, I should bring him on very shortly, and it means I'm probably going to take callers out of sync, and I apologise to CIC, but you may have to wait a little bit longer. But yeah, I mean, I just do not understand how to get across to people like that their arguments are so unpersuasive, because they clearly think that they are. Now, in a court of law, such an argument would be dismissed. In fact, it wouldn't even be allowed into evidence. But if it were, the jury would dismiss it out of hand. And I have no doubt that the likes of Ken Ham and Ray Comfort and Jason Burns and Venom Pang X, I think they'd probably be fine on a jury assessing evidence of the guilt or innocence of someone, because they have the ability to assess that evidence in everyday standards. But when it comes to their beliefs in their God, they seem to throw out of the window any standard of evidence totally, and I just don't grasp it. And all I can put it down to is their willful personal experience and their desire to believe and their refusal to disbelieve. But I don't get it. In fact, whilst you respond to that, if you can, Hogtie, I'll bring in, I think it's Ben who wants to address something on that sort of topic. Hogtie.
Yeah,
have I been rambling inanely, or have I made something?
Yeah, no, it's... well, this is sort of a point of commiseration between us, is that when you meet very sensible Christians who have good judgment in a lot of different areas, are like black belt ninjas at special pleading when it comes to evaluating their own religious claims. And it just gets frustrating sometimes, because you just think, like, how can you not reason sensibly on this issue? Of course, you do meet some that you also see many other areas that they can't reason sensibly on, like there are evangelical Christians now in the U.S. who firmly believe that the U.S. government recently purchased 30,000 guillotines that are being warehoused, I believe, in the state of Kentucky, in preparation for beheading Christians, as foretold in the Book of Revelation. Somehow they can't seem to evaluate, whether this is a plausible claim. That would take us somewhat far afield from the issue you raised. But so I was just. I don't know if we've got someone else who wanted a hangout about hangouts.
Hopefully it's Mouse, and I've sent him a link, and hopefully we got to click a few things to join us.
Yeah, I know. We didn't get that.
I'm also seeing that a message has come through.
I do want to
he's had to install a plugin, so he'll probably be a few minutes. So let's have a look at a few of the other Q&As.
Okay, can I touch real quick? Pick a gooder, and I'll a gooder. That's Saskatchewanese for those. Pick a gooder. Just to touch really quickly on the singularity thing, I feel some embarrassment over not being as eloquent as Matt Hunt, for example, on the singularity. I guess the point I should have made was when Christians ask atheists whether they believe in the singularity or things like that, and we sort of like they see the singularity as a thing. They don't realize we actually want to get rid of the singularity. The singularity is a deficiency in the mathematical model, and the goal is to actually refine and improve or outright replace the mathematical model with one that would not have these singularities or asymptotes or deficiencies in their formulation. I see we have plugins installed.
If anyone wants to watch a video about that, I'd strongly recommend a video on YouTube called "The Arrogance of Being Thick as a Brick."
That's a good one.
That was by some YouTube user called DPR Jones, I think. It's got about 220,000 views at the moment. It's one I'm actually quite proud of, but it discusses, amongst other things, the acceptance by science that people don't know. And just briefly, if I may, before we go to the call, one of the only speeches I listened to at Salt Lake City at the American Atheist Convention this year was by Matt Dillahunty, and he was talking about the efficiency of debating with theists, and he was saying that it was definitely a positive thing to do. But in the speech, he also talked about the disarming effect of saying to your opponent, "I don't know," and they sort of like get stumbled by this. I have to say that I use that frequently because there's so many things I don't know, and there's no embarrassment in saying I do not know, or it is not known. I strongly encourage people to use it more often. Anyway, I hope now that we're joined by Mouse. Are you with us, sir?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can indeed. What have you got for us?
Yeah, so I must apologise for my my video. It kind of looks like I'm in dark. It's just quite early, and I have the complete absence of any natural light. But what I was wondering,
I hope it's all right if I say you are in Australia, and God knows what time. What time is it there?
It's 6 in the morning, but your show starts at 5.
And does Australia not have electricity?
No, we do. I've got the lights on. It's just my. Like,
it's okay.
They have electricity, but it's solar powered.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe right in the center. Yeah, look, I was just wanted to ask. Like, so I've watched a bunch of your shows recently, and I find it really, really interesting. Do you guys think there's anything like inherently damaging in being religious? Because like I would consider myself religious, but I also tend to agree on nearly everything you say from like a scientific perspective or a policy perspective. I come from.
If I could go first on this and just deal with that very first point, is there something potentially? Is there something inherently dangerous about being religious? On the whole, I would say not, but potentially there is. It depends on the level of how religious you are. I think if the extreme religious can justify and do justify or seek to justify the most appalling things, discrimination, bigotry, hatred, homophobia, sexism. They can, even in a country like America, seek to interfere with the educational system in a detrimental way. That again, well, all the things I said before apply to America as they do in other countries. So potentially, yes, religion can be deeply damaging. Now, on a personal level, I wouldn't ever seek to, nor could I. It would make no sense to try and tell you what you should and should not believe. I leave you entirely free to believe in whatever you want to, without criticism at all. But where I think that I have a right to step in is when you seek to use your beliefs to do any of the aforementioned things, such as bigotry, discrimination, hatred, and homophobia, sexophobia, and whatever, all of those things, then I think I've got a right to criticize you. Otherwise, I don't care what anyone believes.
Yeah, I wonder if I can add to that before you sort of. I appreciate you probably got a part B to that question, but you're sort of catching me at a moment when I've kind of wanted to unload on this issue a little bit too, because, and I will say your timing is very strange, because you happen to be calling in at a point in the broadcast where we don't have any of our American cousins with us, right? So I'm in Western Canada, DPR is in the UK, and as he commented earlier, in our lands, religion is very much background noise. We don't get into these sorts of disputes over whether or not creationism should be taught in the classroom, and the gay marriage and abortion discussions proceed in a very rational and secular way. Everybody has their say, and religious opinions certainly come into things, but there really isn't a culture war. And I know, the question has come up a couple times. Like, I know most people in the UK who participate in these discussions, a lot of them go by their own actual first and last name in Hangouts and in their YouTube videos, and then the Americans, especially the Christians, tend to go by their actual name, and the non-believers tend to use a pseudonym. So why would I use a pseudonym? This has come up recently a couple of times, and the funny thing about it is that where I live, religion is present and such background noise that if people knew that I was on the internet engaged in counter-apologetics, it would actually stir up some feelings of, like, what is wrong with you? Like, what is your problem with people, having their beliefs in God or Jesus or Vishnu or whatever? And that would mischaracterize it. So I wish to unload a little bit on this issue. I don't see religious faith or spiritual beliefs in itself as a malign force. Just disclosure up front, my personal opinion is that when you really seek the truth, and obviously I find that the truth is there not being much evidence for supernatural stuff, you're better off when you embrace the truth rather than embracing things that make you feel good. But if you ask me if I'm really distressed that there are people in my community or my country that believe in God or pray to Jesus or have a picture of the Last Supper in their dining room, as many people do in my community, I am not distressed by that at all. It really, really doesn't bother me a bit. But we have a culture war going on in amongst, as I say, my American cousins, and I would try to sort of conversationally draw a divide between Christians, that is the global, the Catholics and the Mormons and the Jehovah's Witnesses, just Anglicans, people who culturally and personally believe in Christ and salvation through Christ, versus this dangerous, cancerous growth of nutter evangelical Christianity that wants to get involved in the education system and say that the earth is only 6,000 years old, that insists that the abortion debate has to function around their understanding of morality. And I should put understanding and morality in quotation marks when I talk about their understanding of it. And gay marriage, that everything has to be couched in their terms. And they are demonstrably disturbed and twisted in their interpretation of reality in a way that is clearly dangerous for other people. So I want to draw that distinction between the believers and the nutter believers, and I think a similar distinction can be drawn for the holders of the Islamic faiths as well, because there's quite a spectrum there as well.
Actually, if I could jump in on that very point, because that was what I was going to ask about. Like, DPR was talking about, like, no, there's nothing inherently damaging, but if you take things to their extreme, then you kind of branch out into other issues. My question to you guys, like, do you see this to be true of not just religion, but kind of like other belief sets? So, like, I follow a little bit of American news, so, like, forgive me if this is a bit out of context, but, like, the Cliven Bundy thing, like how he seems to be so obsessed with, like, state land, but he doesn't even realize that he's breaking state laws, and that, like, Republicans are, like, claim to be very, very conservative, but they're actually extremely corporatist. And I know, like, on Thunderfoot, who like I follow, like, engages with feminists who kind of, take things to such an extreme it's not really feminism anymore, and like Sui Park takes like the Oriental rights thing to such an extreme where it's not really about Oriental rights anymore. Like, similarly, I think the sort of religious people you're engaging with have taken it to like such an extreme where it's to me it's not even really recognizable as religion, other than that they say they're talking about God. Does that kind of make sense?
I love all the examples that you just used. I mean, I don't want to say that there's it would. So how do I say this? If you're saying that having an extremism to your style of thought is always wrong, that itself would be kind of an extremist position. But I certainly like the examples that you chose. I think that you've seen the discussions about feminism that we have, and I think when it comes down to it, we agree in equality. Which if you want to define feminism as being that, well, then we all agree on that, everyone on the show here at least. But then, yeah, we deal with this subset of people that, as you say, are such radical feminists that they've actually moved outside the definition of any sort of reasonable definition of feminism. Of course, they embrace the label. I mean, I tend to be a bit of extremist in terms of looking for the truth. I think things that are true, and it's important, and I may call me a religious zealot in thinking that we need to base our decisions and our public policies and whatnot on what is demonstrably true. You want to call me a religious zealot in that? Well, then I guess I'm a fundamentalist truthist or something. I don't know. Some things you have to hang your hat on something, right?
Yeah. Well, because I was asking the origin of my origin of my question was sort of like the goals of the show. Oh yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Well, we'll certainly come to that, but the one distinction that I think that I would like to make, if I may, is that there is a difference between having extreme views and having extreme religious views, and the difference is that those with extreme religious views believe that they are sanctioned and their actions are sanctioned by the God that they believe in, and I think that there is a greater propensity for them to commit more heinous acts than someone who is non-religious. Does that make sense?
If I may ask, what do you mean by sanctioned? Like sanctioned? But do they mean sanctioned by like God as an entity, or sanctioned by the system?
I'll give you an example. I'll give you a specific example. Do you not think that the 9/11 terrorists who flew planes into the two towers and other places, do you not think that they had or believed that they had divine sanction and that they would receive divine reward as a result of their actions?
Yeah, but like a lot of criminals don't think that what they're doing is criminal. Like Clive Bundy, right? Like he doesn't think he's doing anything wrong. He just thinks he's defending his land, but it's not his. Like the feminists, which we would say are not feminists, still think that they're feminists. Like everybody kind of deludes themselves into thinking they're.
Do they put their lives on the line? Do they commit atrocities in the same way as the religious people I'm referring to do?
You could argue that Clive Bundy, when he takes a bunch of guns to the federal agents looking for a fight, is putting his life on the line. But I can understand that it's a different kind of extreme.
I think it is, and I think that distinction ought to be drawn.
I mean, like, so, but do you think there's anything salient about religion which lends its, because like 9/11, at least in the recent history, has only happened like once. Do you think there's anything? I would never imagine Ken Ham.
You've got to be kidding me.
You know what I mean?
You've got to be kidding me. Religious suicide killings have been going on for hundreds of, if not thousands of years.
Yeah, but
people have been dying for their beliefs. People have been killing for their beliefs. People have been doing this because they think they are doing the work of God.
But do you think that Ken Ham would ever...
You can't seriously question that, can you?
No. Let me clarify, sorry.
Right.
Like, would you imagine, like, Ken Ham or any of, like, the American religious people doing that?
Well, some of them, potentially, but the two that you've named, no. They're making far too much money out of it to bother killing anyone and put themselves in danger. No, you know, let us again be cautious about what we're saying. I'm saying that religion can lend itself to extremism and extreme forms of violence and aggression and whatever, but there are other forms of damage that religion can do. Now, Ken Ham, I think, is a potentially harmful force, much like the Discovery Institute is, because he is desperate to get creationism taught in schools. Now that is damaging because it will reduce the output of the final end of the educational system, those that pass degrees and whatever. It will reduce their potential. And I do think the reduction in the potential of America will have dramatic effects throughout the world. So I have a keen interest in ensuring that American students are taught as best they can. And Ken Ham is I'm sorry, he's positively seeking to destroy the quality of education that American students are getting. So I think that is a danger. It's a different sort of danger, I accept, but it is a danger nonetheless.
Yeah, I don't know how do we pit danger against danger. I mean, obviously, 9/11, a very, very dramatic thing, and several thousand people lost their lives, and it's been traumatic for everybody and whatnot. The type of damage that the collective of Ken Ham and Ray Comfort and the Discovery Institute and in my country Ian Juby, the type of damage that they would bring potentially to decrease the education system, to make these cultural changes that make it so that you can no longer have a reasonable public discourse on important social issues like abortion and gay marriage, healthcare funding, climate change. I mean, we're talking about the decrease in the quality of life of millions of people over the next generation or two. How do we weigh that against the death of several thousand people in an explosion and building collapse? I mean, I just think the points ought to be conceded that what they do is destructive, and in terms of saying, well, that's maybe you're not saying this, but that's somehow more acceptable or less acceptable or not as bad as flying planes into buildings. I find that kind of a dead end.
Yeah. So to clarify, I'm not trying to really like balance one harm against another or whatever. What I'm trying to get at is it's like. Obviously, the people doing like the atrocities of 9/11 come from a different context to what Ken Ham comes from, for example, or the like the American religious people. And when I'm trying to like look for a salient feature in religion which lends itself to harms, which you guys are talking about, you can't compare with from such drastic contexts, right? So like I'm trying to look, for example, in America. What's the difference between a religious extremist and like a feminist or a conservative extremist, if you know what I mean, as opposed to like a religious extremist in America versus a religious extremist from a completely different continent with like other.
I think I've kind of addressed that, and if I haven't, let me see if I can do so again. The difference is that the form of extremism does not necessarily in the case of non-religious people, lead to extreme acts, whereas with religion, it seems to have a propensity to lead to more extreme acts. I probably haven't expressed myself particularly clearly, but I don't know how I can do it better at the moment.
No, that's all right. Let me just address that quickly. So, like I agree that that's demonstrable in the outcome, but not explained in the method. So, for example, like you've kind of said, it lends itself to extreme acts, and we know this because look, here are the acts. But that doesn't really explain like what it is about the faith which leads to the acts. If that does that make sense?
I think it does make sense, but I think also I kind of addressed that before as well. The difference is a feminist won't commit or won't fly a plane into a building thinking that the cause of feminism is going to be improved by that. The religious extremist may well do that, thinking that he is serving and doing the will of his God or her God.
Yeah. So, like, look, I think 9/11 is just a problematic example.
I could use many other examples. 9/11 is just one. I could use many other examples of religious people committing absolute atrocities throughout history and in the present day. I don't see extreme feminists killing people for their cause.
What about like a modern day American one?
Well, I don't know what you're referring to. You'll have to help me out.
Okay, so like what I was asking is like you know about salience, right? That when you're trying to find a salient feature of something, which lends itself to an action. You can't compare from drastically different contexts. Like the 9/11 committers were from like a very kind of war-torn country to begin with, which the sort of feminists in America are not. So I'm kind of asking, can you think of like an example where a religious extremist in America is out there to kill somebody or to fly a plane into a building?
Oh yes, of course. Hogtie will probably have to help me out with the name. But of course there have been many. There's been the abortion killer that was done purely on, well, I'd say purely on religious grounds. It was obviously not mentally stable. Do you remember the name of him?
No, I loosely remember the name of the doctor.
The doctor was
Tiller.
Tiller, that's right.
Yeah.
I don't remember the killer. There have been, I should be able to reel these off the top of my head. There have been numerous cases of religious people in America committing acts of effectively terrorism, mass murder, or encouraging mass suicides. That's another one.
Yeah, actually, that is a good one. That's somewhat historical. The name's escaping me as well. But the guy, didn't he like convince his little small township to all commit suicide with him, or for some reason or another? I do remember that. That was very troubling.
There was a couple of incidents that immediately spring to mind. There was one I don't know how you pronounce it in America, Waco or Waco.
Waco, Texas. That's the Branch Davidian with David Koresh. You might have Jonestown, James Jones
as well.
Heaven's Gate.
That's right, Heaven's Gate. Yes.
I mean, there
had something to do with a spaceship behind the lunar eclipse or something.
The Hale-Bopp comet. They had to remove their own testicles and put on Nikes and some purple veil or something, and then they would be taken up by the spaceship. I think a Christian, and especially an evangelical Christian, would quite rightly point out, well, none of these examples we're given are people who are real Christians. And that's not the point, and in a way it kind of is the point. That, you know, that the like that sort of religious thinking is, it opens the door for other types of religious thinking that is incredibly destructive. And it's very easy for somebody to say, well, I'm a young earth creationist, Bible-believing evangelical Christian, and I don't agree with what the McVeigh brothers did, for example, in blowing up the federal building in Oklahoma City. And I don't, you know, those people in the Branch Davidian in Waco, Texas, that was a cult. That's not Christianity. You know, they'll distance themselves from those sorts of activities, but that's not what we're here to address, is whether or not these guys are Christians or not real, you know, Christians. It's about that style of thinking. It's about the inability to evaluate your own beliefs and to look at new pieces of information and see whether or not it should be integrated with your existing understanding of the world, or whether your existing understanding needs to be updated to accommodate new information that's been verified as true and useful. You know,
if I may, on that point, like, that's exactly what I'm talking about, right? Like, because for me, I think most Christians do think exactly like how you said, like that there is accommodation. That's why, like, with these polls and new popes, there are more like kind of liberal ideas coming in. People who identify as Christians but are like okay with the idea of non-Christians getting into heaven if they've done all the right things, or are okay with like gay marriage. That's probably not such the case in America, but like that's more to the point, right? I think the people you're really trying to get at are not necessarily religious thinkers, but just people who have this inability to update that, you know, to like the non-scientific thinkers, which is why I'm more inclined to like people like Thunderfoot, right? Because he tends to, like, you know, point and direct his anger towards anybody who doesn't like the scientific method, not just religious people, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, and when you were listening to your examples before, I was going to
as an example. I was going to use Thunderfoot as an example earlier on. when Venom Fang X first started producing his videos back in, what, 2005, 2006, or whatever, he obviously parroting and reproduced a lot of his material in endless videos. And I think that if somebody does that and introduces such nonsense into the public domain, then people are perfectly entitled to respond to him. And Thunderfoot did it in a wonderful series, Why Do People Laugh at Creationists? And I don't think you would criticize that. I'm curious, though, to know if you're happy to tell us. You said that you consider yourself to be a theist. What flavor of theism do you hold to?
Oh, I'm a Catholic, but like the difference between Catholic and Anglican and stuff has always been lost on me. I always have to get like other religious people to explain it to me. But largely just the archetypal, you know, like God, Jesus, that sort of thing.
So you broke up quite badly there. I didn't really hear that. Did anyone else?
Sorry. I'm a Christian Catholic. Did you hear that?
Yeah, and I would wonder how much time do you spend with the Bible?
What, the actual book?
Yeah.
Oh, barely any. I was at church every Sunday, boy, for like most of my childhood. But actual time with the book, not that much.
Yeah, because I will say, and again, you sort of asked what our problem is with religious thinking and that sort of thing, and we got ourselves into a discussion about flying planes into buildings and blowing up buildings and you know, people suiciding and all these very, very dramatic things, and of course the dramatic impact of anti-science education and whatnot. But I will say I kind of have, this is why I said there's a bit of a rant ahead at the beginning about the issues I've had to wrestle with lately about my beefs with religiosity when I do live in a relatively religious place, and I don't really have a beef with the people around me. Recall that I said it's my thinking that people would be better off if they sort of, you know, accepted reality and had more vigor and interest in reality. But I don't mind that other people around me, you know, believe in Jesus and whatnot. I guess I have two separate beefs. One of them that is a big concern, and one of them that I just sort of shrug and say, okay, that's fine, people can be that way. We've already very clearly stated what my concern, I think shared with other people, what my concern is with the evangelical anti-science crowd. But I do have to admit that when I look at the sort of, you know, vanilla wafer, middle of the road, well, I'm a Christian because my parents were Christian, you know, I was raised Catholic or I was raised Anglican or whatever, I do have to scratch my head sometimes. Like, even in asking you that question, like, you believe in God, I understand. Correct me at any point if I'm wrong in this. You believe in God. You believe God's the creator of the universe. And I would assume, being Catholic, that you believe God has a plan for you. And you also believe that God, through some means, has written this book. With
the God through some means has written this book. Like, that stuff I'm very kind of speculative about, like, because I always view it as more of like a utilitarian thing. Like, I see instances in my life where at very, very little opportunity cost, like the belief in God or like the gathering of church, like as a peaceful event, can be extremely useful in people's lives. Like, it helps people, it increases happiness, which is like what I think is an overall good thing. As for the specifics of like, is the Bible the literal word of God? Those sort of questions seem fairly meaningless on me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, if even if it is or even.
Could I invite you? Could I invite you to answer this question? Do you have a view? Do you have a view on abortion?
I'm forming one. It's a very complicated issue.
Okay,
do you want me to elaborate?
No, that's a good answer. I like it.
I was expecting, and I kind of, in a nasty way, hoping that you would say yes, I have, and I was going to use that as an example. I can't, but with you specifically, but I can use it in a general way. I think abortion is an incredible, it's an enormous moral issue, and it is one that simply cannot be addressed by, the book tells me, and most Catholics will tell you abortion is wrong. It's just simply wrong. They won't address any of the issues about it. And again, this is something that religion does that I think is troubling, that sort of discourse. And why the religious view should be taken into account in such a debate is quite beyond me. But they will just say, no, abortion is wrong. Abortion's wrong. No, killing's wrong. Yeah, they haven't read the Bible, but yeah, killing's wrong.
To be honest, I don't think the Bible doesn't really have a stance on abortion. Like, it's not like the Bible says literally, this is the abortion.
There are a lot of
It sure does.
There are a lot of Catholics as well who will tell you that their beliefs about abortion come directly from the Bible. That you have perhaps read the Bible and are more knowledgeable about its contents than others doesn't stop the fact that the Bible, or perhaps religion in general, the indoctrination that these people have, is wrong. Not going to talk about it, not going to discuss the issues. Abortion's wrong. I'm sorry, I'm interrupting you. Do carry on.
That's all right. So, like, for me, that kind of rings true of more just someone who's very, very unreasonable, aside from someone who's religious. Maybe there's some sort of higher correlation there. But, like, look, I'll outline basically my thinking on abortion, and maybe you guys can, like, fill me in on some sort of argumentation I haven't heard. But, like, for me, the first question has got to be, are fetuses people? And, like, I don't, correct me if I'm wrong, but science hasn't really come up with any, like, meaningful distinction as to when a fetus becomes a person. Like, it's always something quite arbitrary to do with viability or whatnot. So the only way I can kind of think of it is like, well, but when it's just sperm and egg, it has to be acted upon to make it potential for life. And when it's potential for life, it has to be acted upon to cease that. So, like, which is why, like, I'm completely okay with morning after pill. I think you guys call it Plan B, contraception, all of that stuff. But, like, from a, you know, are you killing a potential someone? I think that's true from conception, but that's not necessarily always wrong, because, like, the state does sometimes sanction the killing of other people in self-defense. So I can understand if it's a threat to the mother's life, obviously it has to go. Or in the event of, like, and this is where my thinking is not complete, in the event where you could argue that the mother's quality of life suffers demonstrably because of the existence of the child, whether it be through the actual pregnancy itself or whether it be through having to raise the child, that aborting with that similar self-defense principle may also apply. Like, so in an ideal world, I would say you should probably not abort, but the government must be able to guarantee adequate state care for that child, or the government must be able to guarantee compensation for the harms you feel of actual pregnancy. But obviously no such country exists, so I would err to the side of, from, like, just a utility perspective, saying abortion is okay because the harms to the mother are so demonstrable, if you know what I mean. Does that make sense?
I think it's clear you put a lot of thought.
It does make sense, and I know that Hooked and I are in very, very close agreement in our views about abortion, and he has a wonderful way of expressing it. And Hooked, I hope you know what I'm referring to, the statement that you came up with. Otherwise, I'll try and mumble through it, but hopefully you'll get it off pat.
It was a...
No?
I got to remember the exact phrase. I know it had something to do with you know, feeling sort of in general opposed to abortion, wishing that we had a zero abortion rate.
You've messed up.
No, and then it was, yeah, but preferring...
I'll tell you what, I'll speak for both.
Go ahead. You'll remember. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I'll speak for both of us. Both of us are very, very much opposed to abortion. We both would rather it did not happen. Unfortunately, there are situations in which there comes a time where there is a conflict between the rights of an fetus and the rights of a mother. In such circumstances, regrettably, both of us accept that in those circumstances the mother's rights ought to take precedence. But the expression that Hogtie posted so eloquently in the Skype,
I just found it,
and I'm not going to get right, is Go on,
I
have you
just
got
found
it?
it.
Have you got it now?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, go
Um,
on.
I said I'm pro-life, I'm anti-abortion, and only marginally ahead of those two in a photo finish, I'm pro-choice.
So there you are. I don't know whether I'm now speaking for both of us, but I'm certainly speaking for myself. I think there is something about the sanctity of life and the value of human life that makes me anti-abortion. But I accept the reality of life, and the reality of life is there are such circumstances where these conflicts of interest arise, and regrettably and uncomfortably, well, not regrettably, I come down on the rights of the mother to make a decision up to a certain point, and that point is the one I accept. It's the one that's legal in this country, which is 24 weeks. It's behind that, but I won't bore you with that. Does that help explain our position?
To be honest, it sounds very, very similar to mine, but with just a bit more certainty on actual time periods. I'm yet to make up my mind on that. But like, for example, you and I strike me as very similar thinking on the issue, right? That like we both have a general agreement for the sanctity of life. I think that's also common for religious people. The difference you're drawing is that you see a lot of religious people who then stop when it comes to accepting reality. Like,
Yeah.
But for example, like I'm a religious person who like accepts reality every day. We live in it. Like, I'm wondering, is there something you guys can see about the religion you're engaging with, which specifically attacks that, addresses reality sort of caveat, right? Like, because that seems to be what you guys are trying to stop. Does that make sense? That actually came out really garbled.
Yeah, well, I think I can speak to that, and I do notice that Simon has actually, he's been waiting very patiently, so I wonder if I can, just real quick.
You go first, Hogtie, and then we'll come to Simon. You go first.
Yeah, because I think I can address that sort of directly, because I can really pick up on your point about how the religious thinking stops. You know, we asked you, DPR had asked you a very difficult question. You know, in a nutshell, tell us what your opinion is on abortion. That's a complicated issue. And you say, well, you're thinking about it, you're coming up with an opinion, and then when pressed on it, you come up with a very lucid and richly layered description of your thinking that's been going on in this. And we kind of go, yeah, that's actually a sensible viewpoint, and we see where you're headed with it. I think you're going to come to a very strong and well-reasoned position. Nowhere in your reasoning do I hear anything about the edicts of Holy Mother Church or your interpretation of the Bible, which you admit to us you haven't really read. So I guess when you sort of ask us, you know, what is it about religious thinking, and I wonder if you feel a little sort of personally like you're in the out group here because, you know, we're non-believers and you're a believer. I got to tell you honestly, Mouse, that it's sort of, I don't know that, let me say it this way. We have some evangelical Christian followers who watch this show a lot, and they would be a little upset with me if I didn't point this out to you. I don't think you're a Christian. I don't think you're what they would call a real Christian. Because all of your thinking, like first off, you've made no effort to engage what's in the Bible that would define what a Christian is, and you in these conversations we have with you, you're attached to secular thinking, which I applaud and I praise, I don't even know that you're that good of a Catholic, to be honest with you, because you're not even taking up the Catholic position. Everything, you know, you identify to us as a religious person, but then everything in your speech and your discussion is a well thought out, intelligent, secular thinker who's good in conversation. So I don't know how you pick up the gauntlet and take up defense of the religious thinkers of the world. Is that unkind?
Yeah, no, it's not unkind. I somewhat expected that. Sorry, DPR, do you want Simon to speak, or can I address that quickly?
Yeah, and I apologize. We have left Simon waiting for some time.
If it's okay.
Yeah, please address that. We'll come to Simon, and I apologise, Simon. We will get to you, but I think this is an interesting discourse.
Okay, so Hogtie, like, it's interesting that you view secular thinking as opposed to religious thinking. For me, what you actually said was reasonable thinking as opposed to unreasonable thinking. For me, like when I say I haven't read the Bible, I mean like I literally haven't like read page for page. But I've been to church a lot, and I've listened to like my local preacher a lot. But there's never any explicit conversation on abortion, like, because for me, and one of the reasons which I still identify as religious, is that church was one of the few places which was purely for like peace. You know what I mean? Like people just went there without any conflict, just to share in something which they all loved. And furthermore, like I also yeah, go for it. Yeah, go for it.
I'm sorry. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. That a church was a place where you went for peaceful engagement, and the congregation was all. One of the issues that I have is that religion is or causes enormous hatred among other people. And whilst I think that a church was a lovely, peaceful place, and don't get me wrong, I love going to churches, particularly in Cornwall. You have the most beautiful brick stone buildings and the tiny and the most strange places. I love going to them. They are wonderfully peaceful and great places. But the fact that church and the congregation might be peaceful doesn't mean that certain aspects of religion are peaceful, and that's my issue. I've got no problem at all with people going to a church, meeting up, engaging with each other. It's how that engagement ends that worries me, and some of those engagements end in bigotry, in discrimination. Leave aside the terrorism and violence, but bigotry and discrimination of itself is enough for me to criticize religion. Do you get where I'm coming from?
Yeah, so, like, if I may, like, I always try and think of this, like, so to me that thinking is kind of results-based, if you know what I mean. Like you see religious people who are bigots, so the assumption is that something about their religiosity creates the hatefulness. And I don't think that's unreasonable either, because a lot of their hatefulness they actually specifically identify.
I'm sorry, it's not only unreasonable. I very rarely, in fact, I don't think I have ever addressed anyone on YouTube or on the internet at all about their religious beliefs unless they have expressed bigotry based upon those religious beliefs.
Okay, so but that in itself lends to a response bias. That means that 100% of the people you've engaged with on their religious beliefs, you've done so in the context of bigotry. So you've kind of really narrowed the field of religious people you've engaged with. Like, say you were to engage with everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Can I jump in here?
Yeah. Sorry, go for it, Sam.
You've been asking an excellent question about what is the salient point about religion that's the problem, and I think I can answer that question. And I'm going to use a bit of a comparison. If I were to turn around and pass you a book and say that this book gives you the correct political answer always, and I passed you Karl Marx' Communist Manifesto, you would be perfectly in your right and respected to call me an idiot. If somebody passes me a Bible and says all the correct answers to life are inside this Bible and I call them an idiot, they'd call me a bigot. Within religion, there's this inherent idea within all theistic religions that there is one individual that knows everything, that is correct, and has the ultimate authority to dictate everything, and that's God. Once you've decided that there is an individual that can dictate everything, knows all the correct answers, it's not a matter of working it out yourself. It's a matter of finding that God and getting that God to tell you. Within other ideologies, other systems, you cannot make that claim. You can't claim that Karl Marx knew everything. People would just call you an idiot, and you'd have a full debate. If I turn around and say, I don't care whether God did or did not say it, he's an idiot, it would look stupid because you believe as a theistic person that there's an all-powerful deity. How can I, a simple human, argue with him? Within religion is this inherent idea. It's clear that no human has all the answers, so for somebody to claim that they do looks stupid. But for God to claim that, that's not stupid. The inherent problem, the inherent thing within theism is that belief in a being that has all the answers and can give them to you. And eventually you're expected to shut up and listen to it. What you're doing is contrary to what religions want you to do. They want you to take what this deity says as gospel and not to question it. What you're doing, which is absolutely fine, is saying, no, I'm going to look at the world, I'm going to understand the world. At some point, I think most theists have this, they come across a situation where common sense, what they observe, is contrary to what their holy text or their priest or their church tells them. And at that moment they have a choice, or they have a few choices. Ignore their common sense, do something stupid like kill an abortion doctor or fly yourself into a tower, make up an excuse, or ignore their religion. And that is the inherent difference, that's the inherent problem, at least as I see it.
Alright, so if I could address that, because that's like an excellent piece, if I may say so. But look, where I think that's a bit incorrect, kind of, is that you kind of talk about religion as an entity in and of itself, and about how like we accept that like there's a God who knows everything. Like the parts of the Bible which like I've read or I've been read in church or whatnot, I think it's so up to interpretation. That's why every other church or every other priest has a different sermon which has like a different take on the message, right? And so actually a theist you guys should really try and get on the show. His name's Reza Aslan. Talks about like he's got a PhD in biblical studies or something, but it's about the way the Bible was written as a text, and about how like history as we know it, the meaning of the word has changed. And when it was written all the way back when, they weren't writing historical accounts or like literal interpretations of events. They were writing about like truths as they saw them and making up stories which express those truths. Like, and that's very much the way I like kind of approach the Bible, because the most educated person I've heard of on the study is of the opinion that that's the way it should be looked at.
Are you
and that kind of gels with...
Are you accepting? Yeah. Are you accepting by what? Hang on. Are you accepting by what you're saying that the Bible can be read to mean pretty much anything anyone wants it to mean?
Not anything, right? Like obviously it can't mean something complete. Like for example,
well, what central tenets do you take from your religion or from the Bible?
All right, sure. So like that some God exists, and that like belief in him leads to like some reward beyond this earth. So like and I know that's very, very loose, but there's also a number of things like which are not central but tangential about like the way you should treat other people like as yourself, or like stuff like that. I would have to go off central tenets, but does that kind of answer your question or not?
So, so far as I understand it, your central tenets are a God exists and there is some reward after life. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
That God, that God may or may not be described accurately or inaccurately. So basically, for you, and I don't mean this in an insulting way, for you, you can throw away the Bible because it doesn't help you at all. All you believe in is that there is a God who is a reward after life.
Well, like the Bible, I think is used as more. Say if I was to like choose between religions.
No, I'm not asking how other people use it. I'm asking how. Asking how.
Yeah, I'm trying.
Do you use it at all? Like, because I asked you. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to beat on you, but specifically,
no,
what were the tenets that you took, or the tenets of your religion? And you said there were two. One, there was some sort of God, and two, there was some sort of afterlife. So, the tenets of your religion, you do not need the Bible, do you?
Okay,
you personally do not need the Bible.
Let me address this. I know it seems like I'm not answering, but I promise I am. So, those tenets for it could be shared amongst multiple religions. The reason I choose Christianity, I have a strong feeling it's because I was born into it, but also because the Bible lends itself as some sort of evidence that this is not made up out of nothing. So, for example, like Pastafarianism, we know that it was made up as a religion to mock other religions, so we don't believe in it. Whereas Christianity has like this text which has existed historically, so there's more plausibility. And Jesus, for example, we know was a person at some point. So there's more plausibility that this is the correct story.
I'm terribly sorry. I'm terribly sorry. I have to pause you there. You've made a claim. Justify it.
What's the
without reference to the Bible? Without reference to the Bible, justify that a person called Jesus existed. Do you know what the name Jesus means, by the way? Before you
educate me on what it means.
You tell me first. Extant the Bible. Show me evidence that Jesus existed.
Okay, well, obviously I can't produce it verbally, but I'm under the impression that there was some census data on the time. Hang on. I was under the impression there was some census.
You would be utterly wrong.
Oh, really?
And we can go into that if you like, but you would be wrong.
Well, there's no point in
you are utterly wrong. There is no evidence. Let me finish. There is no evidence extant the Bible that Jesus existed, save for 2 sentences in the entirety of Josephus's works, that he was a real person and did what he is claimed that he did in the Bible.
Josephus doesn't actually.
Does that? Sorry, Simon. I'm sorry. We'll be very patient. Do go on.
Josephus, the person you referenced is that the Jewish historian that was grabbed by the Romans and taken to Rome? Yeah, is that him?
Yes.
He doesn't reference Christ.
He wrote extensively about those times, and in something like a huge number of volumes of work that he produced, there are 2 sentences about someone that may be Jesus.
No, I don't think he.
That's as good. I swear, that's as good as it gets.
No.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you.
He doesn't reference Jesus. He references Christians. He talks about Christians, not about Christ. And he says these are Christians. They believe in this fellow called Christ. It's not the same thing as talking about Christ. He never claims to have met him or seen him. He talks about Christians, which is a different.
I did not say that he said that he had met Christ. He wrote about him, and as I say, it's generally understood that there are 2 small parts of his text that could refer to the Jesus that is referred to in the Bible. It's much like Paul, and Paul had never met him.
Sorry, for some reason I can't hear you guys. I'm working on it.
So there are no eyewitness accounts, is what I'm saying. But anyway, let's not harangue too much Australian caller. I'm sorry. Did you want to respond to that?
He did mention a moment ago his connection was going a little wonky. He might be able to rejoin us. Sometimes cleans up after a few seconds.
Okay. Well, you fill in.
Can I just quickly say something again? The Bible stuff is all interesting and useful, but it's actually ever so slightly off.
It's not. I'm sorry, do carry on. But it's not. Let me explain my point before you go on. It's not interesting. It's only interesting if people who claim that its contents are true can show that they are true, that can show that its contents are accurate. Anyone who begins a conversation with me or has a conversation with me that includes the words, well, the Bible says, it's like, end of. I'm not interested in what the Bible says. It's not interesting. It's not impressive. It's of no importance at all until such time that you can show that the Bible is accurate, and you can't do that. I'm sorry, Simon, do carry on.
That's okay. You're entirely right that it can't be shown to be accurate, and it's just one of many texts. What I was going to say is that it's slightly off the point. the problem is deeper than the Bible. The problem is the God character. Once you've accepted that there is somewhere out there, some being that can give you the correct answer, it's not about human thought and rationality. It's all about finding that deity. Within science, when science changes its mind, we all understand how it does that. When religions change their mind, as they clearly do, they don't write new books, they don't add to the texts, it just changes its mind without reasonable explanation. So
God does work in mysterious ways. I'm acutely aware of the time, and we're coming up to our 2 hours. I'm also aware of the fact that kindly people have sent us questions, and do stick with us as we seek to address them. And they've been ordered by the people who have voted them up the most. And we've got Wayne Hudson has got 6 thumbs up for this question. Can you all see them?
They will have to go to the strip on the right, and I believe it's the 3rd icon down is a little speech balloon.
I'm talking about. I was actually talking about you, Hogtie. Can you see them?
Oh yeah, no, I'm looking at it.
Yeah.
I see Wayne Hudson.
Right.
He's up to 7 there. Also, by the way, there was a question that Heavy Hauler had asked. It got sort of chopped into bits, but I do see his question more completely in the comments, and I wouldn't mind if we have time to address it.
Yeah,
but
we'll come to that. But we've got one up from Wayne Hudson that reads: the biggest danger Christian fanatics are the Reconstructionists who wish to put in place Levitical law and make blasphemy a capital offence. I don't know which country he's talking about. Does that make any sense to you? I don't think that there's any attempts in this country to do so. I imagine that she's like that. I don't think there's any in America, any states in America that are seeking to do it. I imagine it's probably Asian. I don't know. Are you aware of any countries?
No, I'd have to sort of interpret the question very broadly. There's certainly some Islamic nations that are theocracies where blasphemy is a capital offense, and generally you can get out of it by apologizing and reaffirming your faith. And then, of course, people who don't actually do face, like I understand there's actually a woman who's pregnant now that she's an apostate because she was Islamic and then married a Christian man and had converted to Christianity and is now pregnant, is in jail, and apparently would be put to death. But Wayne's comment referred specifically to Christians. I don't know of any places where Christians would want to put people to death. That is a capital punishment for blasphemy. Certainly there is a trend in some countries. I believe the UK has, and what's it called? Is it Section 5 or there's specific laws that they do want to punish people for blasphemy. It's quite popular in the States that they want to have anti-blasphemy laws. In Canada, blasphemy is actually protected speech and could not be made illegal by a sitting parliament. Other than those examples,
there's nothing in Section 5 of the what you're referring to as the Public Order Act of 1986. There's nothing in Section 5 that refers to blasphemy. It basically refers to causing any sort of like alarm, harassment, distress, and whatever. What is troubling is the potential for that to be used to shout at a Christian who may be standing on the street of the city of the United Kingdom, handing out pamphlets, and you saying to them, your beliefs are intolerant, you're a bigot, and whatever, and they could turn around and say, "Oh, you're harassing me," and there is potential for that. So, yeah, okay. Let's move on to the next question. Have you guys ever felt?
Wait. I just, if you don't mind, I just have to jump in. I know something about Christian Reconstructionism in the United States, and yes, it is a real thing, and it is very dangerous. There are groups, one specifically, I forget the name of the founder, but it is very well funded, and they have a lot of power behind the scenes. They are trying to reinstitute Levitican law. I'm not saying that it will happen, but they're very open about it. You just have to know quite a bit about American religious politics to know much about these groups, but they are very well funded and they do have a lot of power, yes.
Right, well, they want to make it so that you can't sit in politics or hold
No,
but an actual death penalty?
Yes, absolutely. And you can look up, again, I forgot the founder, I forgot even the name of the group, but you could just look up a Christian Reconstructionism. There's a very good Wikipedia page on them, actually, where they will cite the relevant documents. They're very open about it. They say, yes, death penalty for gays, death penalty for adulterers by stoning to death, the whole shebang. And they are very well funded. They've been so for decades now, and they do have their fingers in a lot of politicians' pockets who are the extreme right wing. Yeah.
Well, DPR, I think when we've got Nathaniel and Wayne Hudson, and now I see Ozzy's chimed in on it, telling us that we ought to know more about this social phenomenon, that it's more dangerous than perhaps we're speaking to, I think we have to yield. I think I'm getting crushed by the weight of comments telling us.
I didn't see Ozzy. Ozzy, no, if you want to join in, send me a Skype message. I'll get in. The next question, though, I was trying to hope to finish in the next 28 minutes or more. So, have you guys ever thought that you have made a positive impact on the person or group of people you have argued with or debated with, specifically believers, creationists, conspiracy theorists? I'm going to go first on this. Selfishly self-promoting. The absolutely wonderful thinking atheist Seth Andrews has produced a book available on Amazon and on the internet or whatever, in which, in the acknowledgements at the beginning of his book, he actually thanks, amongst other people, including Richard Dawkins, Owen Ra, and Thunderfoot, and whatever, myself. I'm absolutely amazed that he done that, because I thought he was here before I was, but apparently I had some impact on Seth Andrews converting, or as he puts it in his book, deconverting. That has got to be the highest praise I've had, but that's just one amongst many. Yes, I have had lots of positive messages. I can't bring them up now, but yeah. More the religious, looking back at the question, more the religious as opposed to the conspiracy theorists. The conspiracy theorists seem to be the most hardcore group I've ever come across. But yeah, so far as the religious is concerned, it does appear that I've had some sort of like minimal effect. So there we go. Oktay, have you?
Oh yeah, I'm going to go with yes, and I think that distinction is to be made. The believers and the creationists, yes. Conspiracy theorists, no. Now, I haven't interacted with conspiracy theorists as much as DPR, who strangely decided to make several videos on the 9/11 thing and drew some attention there. So I generally don't deal with the conspiracy theorists that much. But the believers, I think if I were to express any pride, which I do hesitantly on this issue, about influence, I would say that there are some real diehard creationists and Christians, especially evangelical Christians, that if they have learned anything from me, it is that there can be sensible people who hold differing opinions from them. I'd say for most of them, the vast majority of them, I haven't changed their thinking about their sort of core beliefs, but have helped them to understand that if your whole attitude about the Christian faith is just shouting into a bullhorn about how everybody's going to burn in hell, then you don't get a lot of traction with people, and you can have sensible conversations with people who think differently than you. And yeah, along the way, there have been a few that you'll be in contact with them in chat rooms, or have discussion with them, and then they'll disappear for a few months, and then after a time, you'll get a message from them that says, "Hey, I was thinking about this, and I looked up the thing you said to look up, and I talked about it with so-and-so, and hey, guess what, I'm an atheist." And I don't ever sort of take any glee or pride out of somebody losing their faith. That's not really the goal. But when I see them say, like, I feel like I've got a better grip on the world now. I feel more relaxed. I'm more happy. I'm learning so much more. And you see somebody who states that their life is actually improving in quality, then yeah, you do feel like you've had a beneficial influence in that way.
I share the sentiment about the discomfort of convincing people or seeking to convince people of their lack of faith. I remember, and I think this is an account that I've probably mentioned before on this show, but some years ago. I'm going back about 30 years or more. And I was in the rowing club at our university, and there was a person called, he was called Tom, in the middle of the boat. He was huge, very good rower, immensely strong. And after one regatta, we went to the pub and we started talking, and it went on to religion. And I didn't realize before that Tom was hugely religious. And I started asking him really very polite questions. You know, well, what do you believe in and why do you believe it and whatever. And he got up and left after an hour or so. And it was only a few days later that someone said to me, "You really upset him." And I said, what do you mean I upset him? And he said, after that conversation you had in the pub with him, he went running back to his house and got on the phone to his pastor or the preacher or whatever, trying to reconfirm his faith because he had rattled him so much. And I remember feeling not any form of joy or adulation or anything. I felt absolutely miserable because I'd caused such an effect in him. So for anyone who's watching that thinks that we really enjoy converting people and destroying their beliefs and everything, it's not true. We don't. We just prefer people to question for themselves.
And there are some people that I don't say this kind of a tongue-in-cheek way, but there are some people that I would never want to deconvert. There's a list of people I've befriended over my chat room time and my YouTube days that I would never want to see them deconvert. And basically, you get on this list of evangelical Christians. If you want to know how you get on this list of how Hogtie will never try to deconvert you, all you have to do is say to me one day, as so many have, "Oh, well, if I didn't believe in God, I'd be out murdering people and stealing and raping." Like, okay, you could stick with your belief in God then.
Personally, just to throw my 2 cents in, I've had a little bit of success with convincing people that secularism is the right answer, not with deconverting, but with convincing people that there has to be a separation between church and state. I've actually had a little bit of success convincing conspiracy theorists as well. There's always one simple argument or one simple fact of never underestimate human stupidity. You get these elaborate, long, complicated stories, and if the answer is yes, but could someone just be a complete and absolute idiot and mucked up, that's always the better answer than this elaborate conspiracy about hiding planes and controlled demolitions. That or the American authorities just made a big mistake and managed to miss 3 people. It's a much more simple answer.
There's one positive influence that I wish I've had over creationists, and I just every year I keep wishing that there'd be an example of somebody who does this. When you tell them how to argue better, so that when they come in with their thing about, well, show me proof of macroevolution, show me proof of a dog, turning into a cat, and you say, well, that's not what it is. There's common ancestry, and you'll explain it to them, and they go, oh, okay. You think, okay, good. At least now they're next time they try to challenge someone's belief in evolution, at least they will be arguing from a proper understanding of evolution. But no, you go back into that chat room the next day and they're saying well, when does a dog ever give birth to kittens? Okay.
Oh, it reminds me a little of the fact that oh, G-Man, you were going to call in? Richard Raspberry, you were going to call in as well. Yeah, dishonesty is not something I like. Let's finish off the show, please, by going through the highest rated questions. Colliding Membranes asks, right back at you, what good does religion do that we can't get from secular means? What good is being wrong, or at the very least unsupported? What does God add to being good? Why add something unnecessary?
I think this one's directed.
Sorry, yeah, I think that was
No,
probably addressed at you.
Yeah, like I can answer this. So, Hogtie brought up an example of some people who like their moral grounding is religion. I think they're probably a fringe case, but that's some good. I think in general for me, I talked about how I think church is like a good place for like peace in general. I think that's something which the world could do, maybe not with like more of being forced on people, because that would undermine the whole thing, but having available. I think the other thing also is like, as long as you're willing to not, take the Bible literally and not kind of say, well, God before all, because obviously your interactions on the earth have to precede your interactions off it. Like, the tenets kind of I take away from some passages of the Bible, and this may be interpreted by like the priest I listened to at the time, is that choice was the most important thing which God gave you, and forgiveness was what he offered if your choices were wrong. So like, for me, I think those are positive messages, and anecdotally, I can tell you stories about people who've found a lot of peace in death from their beliefs, and lots of things about that. Like, as for them being unnecessary, like, I don't want to like go into a hypothetical of if they didn't believe, would they be as happy? Because like they might not have been, and as long as it gives people happiness, then I think that's utility that can't be ignored. That would basically be like, and as for being unnecessary, I wouldn't ever try to force religion on people, because some people get that happiness without it, but some people get it with it. So that's the good from religion, in my opinion.
I actually wanted to answer that as well. This sort of stems from the Hitchens question about what can a religious person do that a good religious act that a religious person can do that an atheist can't do. I actually thought about this for a while, and I ironically had been thinking about it last week. I had been rewatching Ken Follett's The Pillars of the Earth, and it's I don't know if you've ever read the book. It's a great book, but it's about the Middle Ages in England, about the building of the cathedral. But when you read the book, you realize everybody in the book is religious, and of course it's by virtue of the times, etc. But you realize that there are actually certain conditions and contexts when you need religion to do certain things, especially at the time. The times were very brutal. There was very little understood about, reason and rationality. And you could actually scare the hell out of somebody by saying, if you kill this person unnecessarily, you will go to hell. I'm not saying that's a good thing, but I'm saying that it can actually put religion in a context of time and space, which is very difficult sometimes for us to understand living in today's world. I just wanted to add that in. It's a historical thing I wanted to add, but I think it's relevant to understanding what religion is sometimes, and the good that it could actually do at the time, given the context.
I think the case can be made that historically, for cultures, some good has been brought in, and you could ask whether it could have been achieved some other way. And I think same thing personally. Our personal history. I could give you example after example of why I think I have been better off because of my church experience. But I think that's a separate question from whether or not these things do good. In that, sort of looking forward, do we, are these productive social enterprises and productive personal enterprises to engage in religious thinking, and I think in general it's not. And I know this question was very much focused at the mouse, and I would say sort of directly to him that when I listen to how you've shaped as a person, I understand that your participation in the church that is in the church as a building, as a community meeting place, has been productive for you, and I totally get that. I will actually be in a Catholic church in northern Canada next weekend for a funeral, and it'll be, you know, one of those occasions that my family gets together. It's a roof that we meet under. But when I also look at the other sort of positive attributes of what we see in you from our limited exposure in a Google Hangout, I don't see any of those things coming from your religious beliefs or the Catholic Church, or certainly not from the Bible. So I just want to draw that distinction between the historical good that is demonstrable versus whether or not that makes it sort of all-round good to believe in those things. Everything that's good is attainable through other means.
Yeah, could I speak to that quickly?
Well, I keep picking on you, so sure, I think you should.
I don't think religion is inherently necessary for any particular good, other than if you want to believe that in like an afterlife, or you know, which I would say to anybody, you have to believe in this, but if you want to believe in it, then it's only necessary for that. Like you're talking about going to a funeral, even the non-religious people at the funeral will be happy in knowing that the person who has just died in the comfort that they are going to a better place. Like, and that I think, you know,
No.
you're talking about like,
No, I'm totally sorry. I'm terribly sorry. I have to pause you there. No, I do not know that that person is moving on to a better place. And let me finish. The reason that I do not normally attend funerals is because of the hypocrisy and the nonsense that is spoken, not only from the pulpit, but also from the other services that you might get. I do not know that this person has moved on to a better place. I have no knowledge of that at all. I suspect that they have. Please try and justify yourself.
I'll clarify. I didn't say because you know they are. I said because you know that they thought they were, that comforted them. Does that clarify?
Not at all.
Okay, let me try again. So, someone close to you dies who is religious, and they are a Catholic or they are a Christian. In their mind, they aren't terrified of their oncoming death, but you know, they're just comfortable and happy because in their mind they perceive this is just the next step. You don't know that that's the case, but you can't deny that that belief is giving them comfort, and
yes,
in turn,
I can deny it. I can deny it at a specific occasion that I happen to go through, unfortunately. I experienced the process of my friend's son being diagnosed with cancer at 18 months age and going through pain and agony for the next 6 months before he died 3 days after his second birthday. That child had no idea at all. That child suffered for 6 months. None of the arguments that you've raised have got anything or can address that issue.
It wouldn't apply. Like DPR, that's obviously tragic, but that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about someone who has established religious belief, like someone who's old and just dying of old age, or older and dying of some other thing. Like if they think that they are, you know, like
well, no, hang on a second. You're talking about those people. I want to talk about this particular 2-year-old child that died.
Okay, but sorry, can I make?
What do you have to say about that child?
That was a tragedy, and
that's
a tragedy.
Where is your God now?
Well, like in two scenarios, if he does exist, I hope that child, and if there is a heaven, I hope that child's happy in it. If there's not, then it hasn't added or detracted anything.
Could I jump in, please? Because I think I have a very quick response that might help the question that was originally asked.
Go ahead. Yeah. You.
Yeah, well, basically, the question is, would you feel better if an adult thought they were going to heaven after they died? Well, personally, and I might speak for a few other people I don't know, but it wouldn't make me happy to watch someone thinking they were going to heaven any more than it would to watch someone taking heroin or something for the bliss that comes with it. I personally find it slightly unsettling that there still isn't a legitimate reason for them to believe that. I mean, stars had to die so we could live, and then when we die, you go back to them. I think that's sufficient.
The heroin analogy is kind of interesting. I mean, I'm trying to take the Mouse's question and his point in the way he intends it, in that when I look at an elderly relative on his or her deathbed, and I think, am I happy or disappointed that this person believes a certain way as they die? I mean, so my grandmother passes away believing that God is calling her home. So maybe I should think that's a good thing, even though it's not true. I should feel like, well, at least she's not as miserable dying. I think that carries an assumption that's unstated, and I wonder if maybe Mouse hasn't thought this through. What do you think atheists think when they're on their deathbed? And I offer that sort of as a rhetorical question, not really giving you a chance to answer, but I'm going to tell you that I've seen many old people in their last days, and I've seen the feelings that the very religious have. Some of them have some comfort because God's calling them home. Some of them have the anxiety, like, well, okay, it looks like I'm wrapped up here. I'm leaving this world, but what awaits me now? Now my judgment dawns. And you watch. Sorry, I'm having a little tough time with this part of the conversation because of the timing. But when you watch an atheist in her last days, they, at that point, have kind of come to peace. Well, I guess I've done my thing. I hope everybody else is able to do their thing after I'm gone, and they aren't racked with that same grief and anxiety that happens when you see a believer knowing that they're approaching their judgment. And I guess I would ask this question of you, Mouse. I've been meaning to ask you this for a while. We say, well, if there's an afterlife, if there's a God, does it matter to you if there is, like, there either is or there isn't an afterlife? Either it's true that when you close your eyes you don't open them again and that's it, you're gone, or it's true that you go somewhere else and you persist on in some other form. Does it matter to you which is true?
No, because either way, like, if there is, that's great. But if there isn't, the sort of belief I'm talking about, like, still comforts you when you die. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, and I shake my head. Okay, I mean, the whole, as soon as somebody says, well, I don't really care if that's true or not, I find that a very weird answer. But
well, it's not that weird. Like, in the event of you don't know, you have to consider both cases. That's sensible, isn't it?
Yeah.
No, it's not.
So,
You withhold judgment.
No, it's not sensible to say, as you just did, well, you've got to hold both views in equal weight, and yeah, they could both be true.
Well, you have to consider them both. You don't stop caring. You don't stop caring whether or not one of them is true and the other is false.
You can reject one of them, can you not?
okay, yeah. Sorry, Diffie. I think Hogtie actually is interpreting me correctly there. You consider them both. You don't stop caring about. Yeah, you don't stop caring about one completely. Like, for example, I'm religious, right? So I would assume that there is some form of heaven. That doesn't mean that I completely non-consider the possibility that there isn't. Like, you have to consider that because you know it could happen. Does that make sense?
No.
I think one of the things that's being said by Mouse, and do correct me, there's a difference between knowing an answer and suspecting an answer. You accept that you can't. We can say that 2 + 2 = 4. Demonstrate it. You accept that you can't demonstrate the existence of an afterlife, so you understand that for us to say, well, you can't demonstrate it, therefore we can't say that it's true. You sort of agree with that position. You can't demonstrate it. You hope it's real, but understand it's not a demonstrable fact.
Yeah,
where I'm tripped up here, when I asked the question, do you care if it's true or not? Your answer was no, and I wonder if maybe I misunderstand your sort of no. Like, does it not matter to you if it's true? Like, do you not wish to find out whether it's true?
Well, obviously the only way I'm going to find out is by dying, so I don't have a death wish. But when I was talking about before, like the way some people will feel when they die, the sort of feeling I'm expecting from a religious person occurs regardless of whether it's true. Does that make sense?
Yeah, oh, that's true. All that matters is what they actually believe. Yeah, I agree that we can separate the truth of it based on, and say, well, this is what they believe, so how does that make them feel? Yeah.
That's right. So the light's coming out, the sun's going up. So in that regard, no, I don't care because it doesn't have any real effect. That was the way I was answering your question.
Okay. Well, the effect that I see, and again, this is not based. I'm not trying to sob over one particular family member. I'm talking about both in my family life and in a professional capacity, seeing many people at the end of their days, and this fantasy that we have that the religious people rest their head on the pillow and say, "Oh, thank goodness, my peace will come." It's true for some, but for most, it's not. The ones who are able.
So have you got any altruistic evidence on that, or is it just anecdotal?
I'm trying to think if there's anything that would be. You're talking about like published end-of-life studies.
Yeah.
That's a great question, and that's a really fair one. I should actually maybe do a search for.
Yes, well, I can answer it.
Oh, you got one? Okay, yeah.
On the two occasions that I can refer to it, neither of these people, in any way, and both were atheists. Neither of them, anyway, converted in any way. They passed away peacefully, quietly, without any.
Yeah, I think he's. But in terms of, I mean, you got to keep in mind. So the studies that I was involved in had to do with people's interactions with the healthcare system. So when I looked at people's satisfaction at end of life, so there was a lot of published results on this issue about whether people felt they were being properly engaged with the healthcare system. They feel like they were just being, stuck off in the back.
If I misunderstood the
yeah, well, I think his question was.
If I misunderstood the question, I apologize. I'm talking about two personal experiences.
Yeah, I was challenging this assumption that religious people feel comfortable at the end of life, and that non-believers, don't get the same comfort that religious people do. And I'm telling you that my experience, based on dealing with people and having these consultations with them in their palliative care, is that the religious people tend to be more anxious because their judgment dawns, as I say. Whereas atheists tend to say, well, I guess I've done my time here, and they do tend to worry about whether or not the other people around them are gonna do fine, and I wish I'd have been nicer to this person, or I wish I'd have done more for my kids, etc., etc. And the mouse, I think, quite rightly asks if there's any published studies that deal with that, and I was explaining that the work I was doing mostly had to do with people's satisfaction with the quality of care in palliative treatment, and didn't specifically address religiosity. But I think it's a great question. I think that if there has been a study out there where they looked at how religiosity has affected, we used to call them death satisfaction studies. It's a terrible name for it. But are people satisfied with their end of days experiences, and whether or not that satisfaction is correlated to religiosity? I'm saying, in my experience in dealing with these people, both in my family and in professional capacity, is that religiosity is negatively correlated with satisfaction. But I cannot
my point would be this. My point would be this, Hogtie. Whether it was correlative or not, it doesn't provide any evidence.
I might actually be able to help with this. Well, only very slightly. I'm having flashbacks to it was either the BBC or ITV. They did a documentary recording interviews with people who were dying. and there were numerous types of people, theists, atheists, and stuff. And the interviews were about how do you feel now that you're dying, or where do you think you'll be going? If that helps at all with when it comes to records of how people approach death.
What did they say out of interest?
I can't remember it so well, but there was a woman who she was full of regrets and stuff. But I think the essence of her point was that she didn't want to feel like she was preparing for another life that she didn't even know could know is coming. And I think that's an underlying point with non-believers who watch believers dying. It's that we almost feel like they're not that they've wasted their life preparing for something they can't know is coming, but that maybe there's something a little lost in the blink of the life we get if you're constantly obsessed with the one that's coming.
If I've made my point badly, let me see if I can make it again. The fact that I or any other person at the point of death may have some sort of like experience doesn't mean that that experience may be true or not true. I think also Russell wrote about this, about his personal experience of near-death experience. It doesn't make anything true.
Well, I don't think
about to die, and the experience that I have at that point doesn't make my beliefs or whatever any more valid than anyone else's.
I don't think the mouse is actually arguing that those end-of-life experiences would lend any would lend any evidence either way. I mean, I think he literally believes that until you're actually completely dead, then that's when you get to find out whether there's something else afterward. I think what he's arguing for, and I'm taking exception with it, is that let's say for the sake of discussion there is no afterlife, that you close your eyes and you just stop. I think what he's arguing for is that even if there is no afterlife, that it's still true that people feel better believing in this untrue afterlife. And I'm taking exception to that, both on the dedication to truth and also because of observations of how people actually react to that situation.
I wanted to make an important observation here, because every single discussion about this always talks about elderly dying in their beds or, terminally ill patients. It never talks, people never discuss people going around every day facing violence, dying, 3 seconds later after they realize that they're going to die. And I find, having seen that sometimes, no evidence that religious people come to terms, better with their death on such a quick scale as atheists do. And I think that's actually a more important indicator on human dealing with, and belief with death than it is on, when we talk about, the lingering reflection of the dying before they pass away. Nobody ever talks about, people facing death, within minutes. That you have 2 or 3 minutes before you're going to die. You're in a burning building, whatsoever. Do you suddenly see like religious people just laying down and accepting it easily? I don't think anyone ever does.
Can I speak to that quickly? Again, I think you've got to take this comparatively, right? Because in that case, there's no difference, so it doesn't matter. I'm only kind of speaking to the cases where there is a potential for the belief to create a different set of feelings, which is why I feel what Hogpie is talking about is more relevant. If I may speak to his point quickly, I would be like, you're talking about people having regret or like fear of judgment. Like, I don't know why they're feeling that if they really believe in like the overarching forgiveness. Like, and perhaps they've got different religious beliefs than I do. But one of the things which always was stressed above everything else was like, it doesn't matter because you'll be forgiven, right? Like, I'm wondering how that plays into their fear of judgment, but I guess we can't ask them. So Like, but that confuses me.
No,
Well,
I can
I
ask
think
you
it
this
confuses you
question, though, if I may. I want to know how a child who cannot, at that time in his life, can know God. You've got to accept that a two-year-old child cannot understand God, right?
Yeah, of
So
course.
what does your, I'm asking you now for your personal opinion.
Yeah. Oh well, no.
What happens to that child?
Well, nothing. There's no difference to a non-religious child, so it's irrelevant. Like, I'm only talking about for the people who do. Like, is it better or is it worse?
But hang on a second. Okay.
I think I
have to say then, I'm not understanding your point. I'll shut up.
Okay, yeah.
Can I express a little thought? I don't know if I'm interrupting too much, but...
No, go for it.
Well, I think most of your questions seem to come from, and from what I've heard you explain as your religious beliefs and certain things you don't really care either way about and everything. Essentially, it seems to me that you're subscribing to your Catholicism or Christianity purely because, in essence, it boils down to the argument that it makes you feel better. That's pretty much it. Somehow, in a little fragment of your mind, it just makes you feel that little bit better. Like when you're talking about the church, it's a wonderful place to be. And then obviously I sort of thought, well, why can't we have libraries instead? But I think that's essentially it, and it's the battle between I want to believe X because it makes me feel better, and the opposition saying we have to grow up out of believing things because it makes us feel better and look for the truth instead. And those people are, as a result, worried for or bothered by religious people who die thinking what non-believers would think are false things. And it seems almost like a waste somehow.
Can I speak to that quickly? You're talking about wanting to feel better at the expense of truth. I don't think I would ever condone that. Like, if somebody religious wanted to say something like, well, I'm religious so I can't believe in science, that would befuddle me.
Well, it doesn't have to be a dichotomy. I mean, people do
exactly right.
They separate their minds. They're religious on Sundays and scientists during the week, sort of thing.
They address completely different facets of life. Yeah, go, Simon.
So I want to. I think.
Well, no, hang on 1 second. You asked a question. I think it's only right that you be given the opportunity to respond.
Oh, okay, I will just very, very quickly. Yeah, like, I think Cade's what you're talking about is right. Like, you can do both, and there's no reason why being religious excludes you from thinking rationally or excludes you from believing in science. So, like, I do practice both. So that was, I think we're very, very much agreeing.
But that's my point. I don't think you do. I think that's my point. I don't think you do. I think you're more interested in. No, I got to jump on him for this. I don't think you do. I think you practice good social thinking, good moral reasoning. You're interested in science. I don't think you're as interested in religiosity as you think you are. Because you haven't looked through the Bible, because I mean, I understand, like, you have a spiritual view about the afterlife, and you do find it comforting and appealing, and you recognize it to be non-falsifiable, so you're willing to set aside worrying and stressing about whether it's true or not. But when you say, well, I don't see why some Christians would think this or why some Catholics would think that, and the answer is because they're more familiar with Christian theology than you are. Your description that it's all about forgiveness and that, hey, when you approach the end of your days, you cross a finish line and you're handed a trophy, is so completely antithetical, contra-scriptural to the contemporary Christian religion that, like, the Christians listening to this broadcast find what you're saying just foreign to what they believe.
I'd love to hear from them. But it's one of those things where
I wish they'd call in, but
I'd love to hear your response to Oktay's comments.
Yeah. So, like, this is what I'd say. I'd say that there's no one true way to interpret the entire religion, and no one is, like, provably more correct than the other, and that comes down to because that's why there are different sects of the same religion. That's why the Bible is in different languages and it reads differently in each of those things. So in the event of them being multiple interpretations, I can only take my interpretation from my experience. That would be from the priests who I've listened to or the conversations I've had with other religious people. So I suppose what you're saying is in the event of something.
I'm terribly sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just curious because I've spoken to many religious people, many people that have read the Bible, many people who have had their own interpretations. Can you explain to me why I should take your interpretation over and above anyone else's?
And that I couldn't, and that's what I just said. I don't think anyone is more correct than any other.
So why subscribe to any title at all?
Well, this is what you're saying about having it make people feel better. I've seen it make people feel better, and so that to me is utility good. And also when Hogtie says I'm less interested in religion than I am in other things, he's correct, right? I think the beauty of the whole thing is it comes at such a small opportunity cost to the rest of your life. You can be religious and you don't have to really do anything. You can still believe in everything else about the world. I think to me that's kind of the beauty of it.
Isn't that the root of the
Okay, I've had enough now. I'm going to bring the show to an end. I will allow you to give feedback, but I'm sorry, I've heard enough. I'm sorry, it bores me. It really does bore me.
What bores
you? Whoever wanted to comment.
Yeah, well, I want to comment on the.
I'm a believer, but I'm a believer, but I can't give you evidence for anything that I believe in. That bores me.
But here's the thing: is that you raise this example about I don't think there's one right interpretation, and then we start questioning about well, how do we know that your interpretation compares to another? Well, you know what? Well, that's unfortunate, but the thing is, the mouse isn't even making an interpretation, right? What's funny about it is that had he read the Bible, it says expressly in the Bible in 2 Peter chapter 2, right from the beginning, it goes on about how there is only one interpretation, and people who give other interpretations are false prophets, and you have to avoid those false teachers. So I find it amusing that somebody says, well, one interpretation is as good as the next. Well, you're not even making an interpretation if you're not reading it, because if you read it, the book says that you can't make multiple interpretations.
Yes, but that passage is also, they would tell you, subject to interpretation.
I get the
I think that must be a residue. That must be a residue of the Jewish mindset within.
Yeah. Well, that's an amusing moment, sure.
Perhaps unfair to just switching back to the conversation, but I was getting bored, and I was aware at the time and how long the show's been going on. But yeah, I'm sorry. As soon as someone says to me what it says in the Bible, blah blah blah, I lose interest. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm interested if they can talk about the Bible.
Yeah, but he wasn't talking about the Bible.
I know he wasn't.
He never referenced the Bible, in fact. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to encourage him to read John chapter 3 to try to learn about what it means to be a Christian, and then when I realized when he came up with that, I thought, no, he's got to skip ahead. He's got to get up to 2 Peter and realize that it's a little more rigorous than he's hoping. And we're making light, and it's
what I would like to do, if I may, is just quickly go through the Q&A. And finish the show on that. Has everyone got them up? If you go over to the left side, everyone that's involved in this call should be able to see them, the Q&A. And they've been voted up. So we've got Abby Hill again is asking, have we done this one before? If there are limits within science from the beginning, yeah, we've kind of done that. Can we get rid of that one? Okay, select and done.
Why don't you pick a good one, and I'll answer in the meantime while you're scanning for a good one. I want to answer.
Well, you go for it.
Yeah, Heavy
I'll go to the
Holler had
bathroom.
said, and it's a. Oh, I thought you'd be interested in my answer. Okay. The age of
Meet my-
okay.
Right.
DPR's bathroom is quite close to where his computer is, so anyway, read into that what you want. Heavy Holler had asked a question that didn't quite come through on the questions thing, but if you look in the comment section, it was more lucid in there. He was making the point about how when we talk about a 6,000-year-old Earth, it is quite clearly attributable to the writings of Bishop Ussher from I'm going to say the middle of the 17th century, somewhere in there, and then he wonders, well, was that sort of the source of it, or what was the contemporary thinking of the day? Did people think that the Earth was 7,000 years old, and then Ussher said, well, no, it could only be 6,000? And I can only touch on this briefly because there's just so much information on how the understanding of the age of the universe has changed. And what's really weird is that it was a fairly static view of how old the universe was until literally the last century. So, and I wish I could come up with a source for this, but I think it was a sort of a good summary of like how this figure has changed. I guess the main thing to realize, Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time is probably a good start, because he does talk a bit in there about the interesting part is how we come to understand how old the universe is. On what information would you base this? So, for example, if you just woke up, if you were a child who was raised in the forest and you know of the forest, that it's big and there's lots of trees, but you see that trees get very large and they dry out and they die and they fall over, and then you see new saplings coming, you wouldn't be so embarrassed or to think that the forest has been around forever while the individual trees start new and grow old and die, and then there's of course new trees growing after that. And that's generally been the view of the universe. It's been around forever, and individual stars kind of come and go, but the universe itself has been around forever. And quite literally, it wasn't until the in between the First and Second World War that it started to become demonstrable that the universe couldn't be infinitely old. There's issues, it presents problems with entropy, and I wonder if I recall correctly, this is around the time they started noticing consistent redshift. So it was
Edwin Hubble. It was Edwin Hubble who.
I think he gets a lot more credit. I mean, he was like so many other good scientists, stood on the shoulders of giants.
Well, I'm not disputing it, but it was around his time when they started realizing that the universe is different than what they originally suspected.
But it was Hubble and other astronomers of the day and physicists who understood this problem of entropy recognized that the universe could not have lasted forever, regardless of specifically who it was certainly a group of scientists that in between the First and Second World War. I mean, literally the first quarter of the 20th century. So we're talking about Ussher's writings here that are in the 17th century, and even so around that time, geology was probably the biggest source of information on the age of the Earth, and they started to realize that there were features that had to be at least millions of years old. So at the time, there was a growing understanding that the Earth itself had to be at least millions of years old, although billions was a bit of a shocker, which really wouldn't be encountered until literally a couple 100, 200, 300 years later. But the point is, Ussher and the religious people, there were other religious writers at the time that had written about this. They were operating in complete isolation from any of the scientific evidence. Like geologists of the day would look at the rocks and they would be able to come and say, well, oh wow, this has got to be hundreds of thousands or millions of years. And it was the religious scholars, scholars in quotation marks, that would read the Bible and say, well, it doesn't matter what people see through their magnifying glasses or when they look at the stars, because when we look at this book makes sense only if the Earth is a few thousand years old. And therefore, the Earth is only a few thousand years old. So to answer Heavy Holler's question, there's a long, interesting history of change in our understanding of how old the Earth and how old the universe is that has sort of been a convergence amongst different fields of investigation. I would say starting first with geology, and then later coming up with physics and astronomy, and then eventually the field of cosmology. And they each tell independent stories that by the late 20th century started to come to convergence about how old the universe actually is. And the thing that you're asking about, that is Ussher's writing and other contemporaries, 17th century contemporaries of Ussher, they were operating in complete isolation. That's a totally different story. It's literally open the book to page 1 and start reading it, and then make a table of how old these people are. Completely separate from anything that other Christians were studying in the natural world at the time.
Yeah, I'd like to add one more thing here about Bishop Ussher. Everybody references Bishop Ussher because that's all they know. But if you grow up Jewish, you know that, for example, this year is 5774. Okay, it wasn't Bishop Ussher who came up with the figure of 6,000 years old. It's been part of the Jewish tradition that this is the way that they have been counting, you know, since
it is
time began.
I've still been writing 5773 on all my checks.
No, it's 5774, I believe.
Okay.
So you know, this is not Bishop Ussher is not coming out of isolation.
Somebody
from
out there got
tradition
that
from just opening up the Bible, and you know, this comes from a long Jewish tradition of counting their own calendar from their own Bible, which is what Ussher basically did, except that, you know, he estimated some dates a little bit differently, basically, but he came to basically within a couple of hundred years the same conclusion based on the Bible itself. But yeah, Bishop Ussher gets all the credit, but you know, Jews have for a long time known how old, quote unquote, old the universe of the Bible is. So I just had to throw that out there.
Even though you didn't laugh at the joke that I stole from Lewis Black. I know it by heart, and I love Lewis Black. He absolutely, and not only that, he's right. Yeah,
he's absolutely right.
Yeah, you are correct in pointing out. Yeah, what I was referring to, and it wasn't Ussher. There were several Christian scholars, theologians at the time. So when I referenced 17th century writing, I'm actually wrong about that, because all they had to do was look and see what the Jews of the day were saying. And
well, like I said, they were building up on that. They estimated some dates slightly differently, but basically it amounted to the same thing. So it was a justification of what the Jews had been doing for a long time. But the thing is that most Jews didn't believe that the world was only 6,000 or 5,000 some years old. By that time, they had come to realize, most Jews had come to realize that this is just, you know, a founding of their mythology, etc. You know, you do have fundamentalist Jews, but they were a relative minority.
I see DPR points out Pat Robertson has come out on the side of this is. Can I read the question? Do you mind? It says infighting in Christianity. Pat Robertson came out and said the world is millions of years old, and to believe in a young Earth is just crazy, and I'll add an embarrassment to Christians. Ken Ham didn't like it and responded that Pat Robertson does not speak for all Christians, and he's wrong about the Bible. The question comes from...
Yeah, but this is like the second or third time, actually, they've had a spat over this.
It's gone, yeah.
Once was it was right before or right after the debate, and also he said basically the same thing about dinosaurs, I believe, a month or two before, where he said, you know, this is just crazy, and you're making us look like idiots, and Ken Ham responded to him on his website. So this is like I think the third time, maybe the second, but they've had this little history now but you know, Pat Robertson does come out every now and then and says something sensible, but this is a clear case of the clock, you know, a broken clock being, you know, right once or twice a day, depending on how you view your hours.
Pat Robertson also seems to have a soft spot for is it the transgendered crowd? Like he's got strong feelings about gay people, but the transgendered, he's sympathetic.
Yeah, he said non-bigoted stuff about them once, I believe, and he said non-crazy stuff, I think, once about marijuana. Like, you know,
this is TYT speaking, isn't it?
No. But also they get it from Right Wing Watch, actually. and I've been subscribed to Right
I
Wing
saw
Watch.
I saw it myself on TYT.
I'm subscribed to TYT, but also Right Wing Watch and a few others.
Yeah.
I
would. Oh, sorry.
No, you go ahead. You go ahead.
I would only say that the difference between them is that they are chasing different dollars. One of them's chasing the young Earth creationist dollar, and the other one's chasing the pseudo-mainstream televangelist supporting dollar, and that's about it. Maybe Pat Robertson's got a thing for the pink dollar. I don't know, but at the moment he's chasing.
No, I'm not convinced that this is entirely about dollars for Pat Robertson. I mean, this is a guy who...
Diamonds.
No, yeah, diamonds maybe. But this is a guy who clearly has said some things which have ostracized him from various parts of American society at one time or another, and has not backed down from saying those things. I don't think he's ever apologized for anything he's ever said.
Well, like the gays wearing the rings that cut people and give people AIDS.
Yeah.
Let me say something about Ken Ham's actual view on salvation and understanding of the age of the earth. In the Bill Nye Ken Ham debate, Ken Ham did say that it's demonstrable that the earth is young, and not that salvation hinges on that. He said expressly during that debate that not that it's an important theological issue. Salvation's available by accepting Christ into your heart. You watch him say stuff like that because it's bullshit. That is not what he believes. When young Earth creationists are amongst a broader Christian crowd, and they're trying to demonstrate that it's really the atheists that are the enemy, they will say these inclusive things like, "Oh, it's not really important if you believe in a young Earth. It's not really a big deal as long as you accept Christ as your Savior. You're good to go." But then you listen to him in any other interview, and he says, "If you don't believe in a young Earth, then you're calling God a liar, and you will end up in hell."
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's his whole
PR.
shtick. Yeah, but that's his whole. That's his selling point. That's his PR line, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But I mean, for him and the battle between him and Pat Robertson doesn't make me want to pat Robertson on the back any more than it makes me want to pat. Napoleon, the guy who thinks he's Napoleon in the sanitarium versus the guy who thinks he's Alexander the Great, telling Alexander the Great, "You're not Alexander the Great, but I'm Napoleon." It's the same. They're two crazies.
Yeah, I like the way you put it. You said, so Pat Robertson has said a couple of non-crazy things. And that's the man bites dog story here.
Look,
right? I mean, TYT, like Cenk and Anna will all of a sudden hold a special broadcast of Young Turks because one day Pat Robertson said something that wasn't completely batshit insane.
I know, but look, Ken Ham has said some things that are not batshit insane. I know, amazing to believe, but true. But he discounts geocentrism. Okay, and you do have Christian geocentrism as evidenced since a few years by Nephilim Free and others. So Ken Ham, his own website says this is an idiotic idea. Okay, and he discounts flat Earth. Okay, so these are two ideas which I agree with Ken Ham, but it doesn't make me want to say, "Well, Ken Ham, you're doing a great job there, buddy." It's a little bit. It's a little different there. So yeah, it's the same sort of thing. They're all crazy. Some of them will say some things that are true, but most of what they say is utter bullshit. It's just that simple.
Well, they can all say sensible things. I mean, they've all said hello, which is perfectly sensible. But I think it's their intentions.
Yeah, okay, let's move on to the next question. A verified comment. Let's move on to the next question. If someone asks about how atheists are offended by Christian prayer, return the question and
that was my question, DPR. That was my question.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're done. We're done with you and that question. Let's move on to the next one. I'm just taking them quickly as best I can because I'm going to end the show very quickly. The next one is this another one of yours or?
No, I only wrote one, I think.
Oh, animals are really cool. No, we're not doing with that. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Oh God, we're back to 9/11. If anyone wants to talk to me personally about 9/11, send me a message to
Well,
my.
I can talk at length about 9/11 because I was there. But if they mean
I'm not going to go
geopolitically,
there.
yeah, if they mean geopolitically,
I'm
that's a
not
different
going
thing
to go there.
altogether. Yeah.
Yeah. If
Well,
you
I was
have
kind of
any
hoping.
issues with me about 9/11, send me a message on my YouTube channel, and I will address it. I ain't going to go there now. Okay, is there anything else that anyone has seen on the Q&A that they want to address before I bring this show to a close?
Yeah, I am not seeing it. I mean, I think we've a lot of interesting discussion in there. I'm not seeing anything new in there. There's actually a comment I'm scanning for that has not shown up. I was wondering if somebody would either challenge me on the end-of-life issue, whether religiosity makes it better or worse, or whether, as often happens during the broadcasts when I shoot my mouth off like that, somebody will actually fire off the reference. If you guys know, we'll bring it up on a future episode, but I can tell you that I managed to flip through my rather old copy of the Death Anxiety Handbook, and they say there's really no correlation between your religiosity and your anxiety at death, but this is based on research in the 70s. So,
I just want to say,
man, bring it up. We'll talk about it again later.
No, I just want to defend Mouse for a second. I think that was his name. I understood what he was trying to say. Doesn't mean I agree with it, but I understood what he was trying to say in terms of your feelings watching your grandmother pass away, that her belief brings her peace at the end, okay, instead of anxiety. I think that your point, Hogtie, though, was very on target, that this is not often the case, or it is not, the majority of the cases, that believers are just as anxious as non-believers at the point of death, which was a thing I'm trying to bring, what I tried to bring up, in other situations where death is a relevant factor and not on somebody's, lingering deathbed. That's all. But I understood what he was trying to say. I did.
I just think it's not based on solid fact, and I was kind of hoping that.
I agree.
I've got an old copy of Death Anxiety Handbook, although it's a pretty standard clinical guide, and I'm sure somebody else in the audience has a newer copy or seen this based on newer research, and I think we can put a pin in it, and it'll come up again on a future show, because I like to challenge some of these ideas.
Yeah, let's put a pin in it.
Let's say, well, this is a good thing about religion, because it's often not.
No, the pin is there any evidence that whatever one feels at the time of death has any evidence in relation to what happens after death?
I know, but he wasn't talking about that.
Okay, I've misunderstood it, but even if I have misunderstood it, I have to bring this program to a close because I am so tired now. I do apologise. It's been absolutely wonderful, and I think that the guests that we've had on have been incredible, and they've contributed to a wonderful conversation, but I'm going to end it. I'm terribly sorry. And no one, I knew there was one final word, no one has contacted me, I should say, about iTunes. Someone out there must be able to help us in relation to iTunes. Apart from that, we're done.